Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Silver Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Most times he can ignore it. The swirling wind of doubts, the memories he tried so hard to forget, the feeling of never getting enough air. But some days like these it became impossible to ignore. The thoughts were always there, whispering to him. And he supposes he could count those as his good days. The days where it's easier to smile but he's still not sure if it's real. Where it's easier to fall asleep, but then again, he doesn't know. For the only reason he sleeps is to not feel anything. Then there's the days where the whispers become silent screaming. When he can't help but flinch when it gets too loud and when the company that he usually earns gets exhausting. Because some days, it feels like his lungs are crushing under this invisible weight. Sometimes he wonders if he should ask for help. Even though Izuku knows he's not fine, he realizes that he's just not worth it. There are so many people who need it so much more than him, people who have it off so much worse. Because Izuku has everything he's ever wanted. He has friends, teachers that are here to help him. He trusts them as heroes, not teachers, a quirk, and even All Might. There is absolutely no reason why he should be feeling like this. So Izuku says he's fine. On the days where his mind just won't let him sleep and he feels confined in his room, he ventures up to the dorm's rooftop. Some might say that it wasn't safe to go to a place that could bring you eternal peace. But Izuku has been doing this since he was 11. He jumps over the railing and sits on the edge, letting his legs dangle off of the ledge. This is his safe place, the one time where he doesn't have to be anyone. Izuku won't jump, not even when it makes the most sense, or when the wind whispers to him. He won't jump even though he wonders what it would feel like if he just leaned a little bit too forward and fell. He won't jump because he knows hopes that better days are to come, that he's made it so far and he's a hand lengths away from his dream. Problem child. Izuku thought that his teacher seeing him like this would cause him to panic. But it didn't. He didn't care because there was nothing to be worried about. Izuku wasn't going to jump. Don't worry, Aizawa-sensei. I'm not going to jump. He looked over to see Aizawa now sitting next to him. His teacher wasn't looking at him. So Izuku turned his head back to the star-filled sky. Why are you up here at 3 in the morning? Izuku knew that Aizawa cared about his students, but that didn't mean he necessarily cared about him. Yue had changed many things for Izuku, but putting his trust in his teachers was not one of them. I couldn't sleep. The voices were too loud, so you decided to come to the rooftop. It was not a question, not the first time. Izuku had lost count of all the times he came up to the roof, just like he lost count of all the red spider lilies he found on his desk. The silence that usually brought him ease was driving him insane. Why hadn't Aizawa left him alone yet? He wasn't going to jump, so there was nothing to be worried about. Not that he's saying Aizawa should be worried about that, either. You know, you don't have to pretend. His voice was numb, but inside he was feeling a rage that he couldn't understand. He never understood himself. You don't have to act like you care. He felt like just as he was getting better, just when he was beginning to feel happy, everything fell apart. I know you don't. I mean, why would you? He had failed so many people. He failed his mother for burdening her. He failed Kaken for being the cause of their broken friendship. He failed Sir Nightai and Mirio. And someday, he's going to fail All Might. I'm not worth being worried over. Besides, I'll be okay. I'm not going to jump. Him and Aizawa knew he wasn't just trying to convince Aizawa that he wasn't going to leap off that building. Midoryia, do you care about me? Do you worry about me? The questions, as easy as they were, confused Izuku. Of course I do. You've done so much for us. Okay. Then what if I tell you that you are not worried about me? That you don't care about me? I'd try to convince you that I do worry. And I do care. Izuku, I do care for you, and I am worried about you. The sentence felt foreign to Izuku's ears, because never had a teacher said that to him. To Izuku, those words were just an impossible dream. Midoryia, you have saved so many people and have done so many amazing things, but you are still a child. It's easy to forget that, but that doesn't make it any less true. You have so much weight on your shoulders. And although I may not understand what you're feeling right now, I want you to know that I am here for you. There was a moment of silence between the two. Izuku couldn't find anything to say. What would be the right thing to say in this situation? His mouth was empty with words until it just wasn't. Sometimes I wonder what the point is. Why does it matter if I break another bone? Or I stay up 2 nights in a row? Sometimes I just can't bring myself to care. But at the same time I feel like I have no right in feeling like this. I have everything I ever wanted. And yet, I still have days when I'm just so tired. Izuku, to his surprise, wasn't crying. In fact, he could feel a ghost of a smile on his lips. It felt so good to let this out. And once he started, it was near impossible to stop. Most days I can ignore this feeling. But there are days where I feel like I'm getting crushed by an invisible weight and, oh God, it gets so hard to breathe. I don't remember that last time I was okay. And a part of me is terrified that I will never be okay. That maybe I don't deserve it. Kid, you do deserve to get better. And it's okay if you feel like this. The point is that you are still here. You're still fighting even when the odds seemed against you. You still kept going. I am so proud of you, Midoryia. You deserve help, and I promise that I will always be here for you. I promise you that one day, things are going to get better. Thank you, Aizawa-sensei. Izuku had never felt so free. Today we are going to play a simple game of hide and seek. Aizawa's voice rings in Izuku's head like a broken record. He feels his hands start to shake and the big urge to run. The panic, one he hasn't felt in years, comes back so naturally it's like breathing. Class 1A is right next to a fake village with trees surrounding it. It's about 10 blocks worth of hiding spots for the students. Son, let's play a game. You'll be given 10 minutes to hide and I will have an hour to find you. Once I find you, you will go back to this spot and wait until the game is over. The ability to hide is an essential ability as heroes and may prove to be life-saving in the future. You hide and I'll try to find you within 30 minutes. Izuku knew what would happen if he was found. Izuku tried to tell himself that this was a training exercise for heroics and not the hell game his father made him play. But it was already too late and his brain had already switched to that time when everything was dark and lacked the warmth he has now. It was too late to tell himself that everything was okay. Your 5 minutes starts now. And just like that, Izuku listened to his body and ran. He had to remind himself not to use one for all since the green lightning could easily give himself away. So he ran without a quirk and discarded his shoes somewhere he doesn't remember because shoes created noise and noise was bad. His running was silent and he easily blended in with the shadows. It'll be fun, right Izu? An innocent little game. Izuku wanted to scream at him that this wasn't fun. But if he did that then he might hurt Mom. So he played. Izuku hid under a tree that was shaded and that blended in with the rest of the fake village. He slowed down his breathing and hid his presence. He saw some of his classmates walk by him trying to find a hiding spot still. No one noticed him, just like they should. And then the game started, as did the silent tears that fell from Izuku's eyes. He just had to do this for an hour. He could do that. All Midoryia had to do was stay silent and move from his spot if his teacher came a little too close for comfort. Izuku has been trained to hide since 3. He could do this. He played and he lost. He gained more scars. He played and he lost. He gained more scars. He played and he won. He gained a smirk and a few bruises. He played and he lost. He gained a broken bone. He played and played and played until, vaguely, Izuku saw some of his friends walk back with solemn faces from getting found. Izuku's tears just ran down faster because he realized this wasn't the game he played before. His friends weren't being kicked or punched or cut open and having bones broken. But what if this was some kind of messed up test for him? What if he was found before the time was up and he just had to endure another torture session? What would happen if he was found before the time had gone to 0? Every instinct told him that something really bad would happen, so Izuku hunched his shoulders together to make himself even smaller than he already was. Midoryia was good at hiding, good at concealing his presence, good at making himself invisible. Until one day his dad had left. He doesn't know why, he just did. And Izuku is terrified for the day he might come back. It's a never-ending dread that hangs on his shoulders every day. Because for 5 years he had to hide under beds and desks. And he had to hide in the dark even when he used to be deathly afraid of it. Because for 5 years Izuku was taking hits and glass and burns. And then, he just leaves. All those years of fear and pain stayed with him no matter how hard he tried to shake it off. He's learned to ignore them, and it works. Until something happens that sets him back that makes him spiral into a sea of memories that he wants to forget. The time is up. Remaining students come back to the meeting place. Izuku lets out the first real breath for the entire hour. He had made it, but now what? Midoryia wipes the remains of tears from his face and gets up on shaky feet. He walks until he sees everybody already there. It's only then that he realized he forgot to find his shoes. But he doesn't really care. Winning the game means less punishment. Congratulations, problem child. You were the only one I couldn't find. Izuku tries to smile, but his shoulders are too hunched and his hands are too shaky. His eyes itch from the hour of crying, and all he wants to do is forget. Forget about today. Forget about this game and all the memories that came along with it. It's just an innocent little game. No one seems to notice Izuku's eyes that are just a notch too dull and the redness around his cheeks. They're probably talking about how hard or even how fun that game was. While all Izuku could do was tell himself that he's safe and his dad isn't here. He jumps at the sudden contact of a hand being placed by his shoulder. His father used to do that when he found him. Right before he meets eyes with Aizawa and forces to the best of his ability to relax. Izuku notices how his teacher's eyes are glazed with curiosity and worry. Worry that shouldn't be there. Right before his father beat him until he passed out. Midoryia, how did you learn to hide so well? Because Aizawa had never had a student that went the full hour without being found. Aizawa, who searched everywhere, couldn't even sense Midoriya's presence, which was worrying, since the only way you could learn to hide that well at his age is if your life depended on it. Aizawa tried not to think that was the case with his student. He was far too young to deal with any of that. You want to be a hero, right son? Think of this as some sort of training. Izuku's eyes hardened with the walls he surrounded himself in. He had never told anyone what his father did to him. He was planning on keeping that secret to his grave. My father used to make me play the game with him all the time. It was the truth, but it was also far from it. Aizawa dropped his hand from Izuku's shoulder and sighed. Something seemed off about the way he said it. He said his father made him play the game. And the way Midoriya's eyes hardened and his voice turned cold and void of any emotion. Nothing about this was settling right with Shouta. When Izuku started to walk away, Shouta called after him, "Hey, problem child." Izuku stopped walking and turned to face him. "Did anything happen when your father made you play hide and seek?" Midoriya sent a smile towards him. The smile was nothing like the grins he usually displayed. This one was cold and betrayed none of his thoughts or feelings. It sent cold shivers up and down Shouta's spine. This was not that Izuku he knew. This one had secrets and was guarded with walls that were near impossible to reach. "Nothing happened, sensei. After all, it is just an innocent little game." Izuku, now in his second year, was doing a simple patrol near UA. It was supposed to be for practice, and now that he had his provisional license, he could fight if necessary. His patrol was only 2 hours, and it was rare that he ever came across anything. Every once in a while he captured a robber or even did something as simple as helping an old lady walk across the street. Even though it was a simple thing, Deku was beyond happy to finally be able to help people without needing the permission to do so. It made him feel helpful and useful. Nothing like the worthless and useless kid he used to be. One thing he loved about his patrol was jumping off of all the rooftops. It was exhilarating and was a lot faster than just walking on the sidewalk. Izuku had always loved the rooftops. It had brought a sense of calming to him whenever he had his bad days. He was proud of himself that his bad days were getting farther and farther apart. He was finally beginning to feel truly happy. Deku came to an abrupt stop when he saw someone on a rooftop not too far away. The figure was standing on the edge looking up at the sky. Izuku's eyes widened and hurried to the rooftop the now identified girl was on. She looked to be maybe 14 years old and was still in her middle school uniform. Deku swallowed the bile that was in his mouth from the familiar uniform she was wearing. It was the exact same design as Aldera's. Go take a swan dive off of a roof and pray for a quirk in your next life. Landing quietly as to not spook the girl, Izuku spoke softly. "Trust me, you don't want to do that." The girl calmly turned around to face him, her white hair swaying in the breeze. She looked so frail, so broken, that Izuku was afraid that the wind might just push her over. "And how do you know?" Her voice was cheerful, something that oddly didn't surprise Izuku. "I've been where you are before. I promise, things do get." Her eyes hardened at the words. "That things do get better? That's utter bullshit. There's no way things will ever get better, especially for someone like me." Deku took a few steps forward, but stopped when she sent him a steely glare. "And why's that?" Midoriya hoped that the desperation in his voice was hidden. She looked so close to just taking that final step. "I'll tell you, and then maybe you'll leave me be to die." Her eyes shined with excitement with the thought of death. And quirkless. That's simple. Though, how was Izuku supposed to figure this one out? He knew every statistic by heart. He knew the cruelty of the world like the back of his hand. He knew that if he hadn't gotten his quirk when he did, Deku wouldn't be here now. He would be 6 feet under. That doesn't mean you don't deserve to be happy. "Can I ask you, do you have any friends?" Midoriya noticed how she kept looking down as if she was giving her all to not jump off. It only made him panic more. But it also brought some hope in him too. She looked surprised by the question, but to her, the answer was easy. "No." "Why?" "Well, you have one now. My name is Midoryia Izuku, but you can call me Deku." "May I ask what's your name?" The girl looked down again, and her eyes seemed to be determined and set on whatever decision she had just made. Deku hoped that it was the one where she would choose to live. Maybe after this, he could even introduce her to his friends and maybe even get Aizawa-sensei's help in shutting down Aldera. "My name is Izumoto Freya. And maybe in the next life we can be friends." And she jumps. Izuku activates as much of one for all as he possible can and runs towards her. He reached his hand out in desperation, but he's met with empty nothingness. Deku's face scrunches in absolute horror as he slowly looks down to see the mangled body of Izumoto Freya. Without thinking, Deku jumps off of the building and jumps wall to wall against the building next to him until he reaches the ground. With tears blurring his vision, he looks at Freya's face. Her neck is twisted in an odd way and her sapphire eyes are even duller than before. But Izuku doesn't notice any of that. No, the only thing he noticed is the light smile that's painted on her lips. He sobs, because right now, that's all he can do. Maybe if he had been there quicker or said something else, she would still be alive right now. He was supposed to be a hero, damn it. How was he supposed to even think of being one if he couldn't even save someone from themselves? Izuku throws up. Aizawa was in the common room with the rest of his students when he gets the call. It's 3:30, which means Midoriya was supposed to be back from his patrol 30 minutes ago. And if Aizawa knew one thing about his problem child, it was that he was never late. Ever. So when he sees the call is from Tsukachi, he knows that whatever this phone call is going to be about, it's not going to be good. What happened? That alone successfully shuts everyone in the common room up. Maybe it's the slightly urgent and worried tone that he used something that he never uses, or it's the fact that they want to eavesdrop. Either way, Shouta is thankful for the silence. Aizawa pales as he hears what the detective has to say. This was bad. Just as Midoriya was starting to get better, yes. He could tell that Midoriya has been happier. No, he doesn't know how his student was unhappy in the first place. Something has to happen to fuck it all up. What? You just let him go after he said he was okay. Aizawa knew that he's going to have to yell at Tsukachi for being so stupid later. He's smart. He probably figured a loophole to your quirk. Aizawa let out a rough sigh. How was he supposed to get out of this one without having anything even more severe happen? Are you sure he's on his way? I swear to God. Tsukachi, if he's not back here in the next 10 minutes, and then a minute later he hangs up and rubs his temples. He didn't even get the full details about what happened. Apparently it didn't matter to most of the police force on what had caused the suicide. A suicide is a suicide. Nothing else to it. Shouta looked up to see his class looking at him and worried. He could even see Bakugo have a hint of worry in his eyes. Is Deku-kun okay, Aizawa-sensei? Uraraka questioned as her face got scrunched up with worry. Just as Aizawa was going to give an answer, the boy in question walked in with his eyes looking more lost and empty than he had ever seen them before. Midoriya looked up and gave them such a broken smile that it could have made him cry. Sorry I'm late, sensei. I lost track of time, I guess. Everyone knew that Lai wasn't going to give him a pass. It was clear at how broken Izuku had become in just a few short hours. Aizawa walked over to his student and put a comforting hand on his shoulder. Tsukachi told me what happened. Admittedly, not much though. You know that it wasn't your fault, right? He knew that probably wasn't the case though. No matter how much he hoped it was. Izuku's eyes flashed with pure rage as he took a step back from him. The other students gasped at how angry Midoriya looked. Aizawa prided himself in knowing what someone was feeling easily and knowing where someone's anger was pointed. But right now, Aizawa had no clue. All he knew was that Midoriya was mad. Really mad. But it is. I should have known what to say. I should have been there to grab her faster. And I knew exactly what she was going through and why she was going through it. I even told her that I could be her first friend. And I selfishly hoped that maybe I could have introduced her to my friends as well. But she was quirkless, and in today's age, 98% of the quirkless don't make it past age 18. 18. Freya had probably been told more times than she could count at how useless she was, and how she should just die. Probably so much that she convinced herself that that was pure, undeniable facts. So much that it prevented me from saving her. By now everyone had a very good idea on what happened. Some people gasped in horror, some cried, some Bakugo started shaking as their eyes dilated in horror and recognition. Izuku was gasping and shaking, but continued. Aizawa let him, or else Midoriya might have just held all this in until it destroyed him. She even went to the middle school I went to. And let me tell you, they don't give a flying fuck about the quirkless. The teachers, the staffs, the students make sure their life is a living hell, reminding them on how useless and pathetic they are. Even the cops that I called didn't even question why she killed herself. As soon as I said quirkless, which I knew. I shouldn't they immediately closed the case. I bet if a student with a quirk committed suicide there would have been a lot more questioning. They might have even done some investigating and closed that shit school she went to. By now, Izuku had fallen into Aizawa's embrace and was clutching onto his shirt for dear life. He was sobbing and he sounded so tired. It's just that this system is so messed up and it's so obvious. And yet, everyone turns a blind eye to it because they have a quirk and that means it doesn't concern them. But that's the thing. It has everything to do with them because they're the ones who can fix all of this hate and death. Why? Why does it have to be like this? Izuku's voice was getting quieter until it was just a hoarse whisper. Aizawa saw Bakugo come up and join in the hug. And then soon everyone was in on the hug, all trying to comfort the boy who had been through far too much far too soon. At the end, Bakugo grabbed Izuku by the shoulders and looked him right in the eye. Listen here, nerd, because I'm only going to say this once. You will be the one to fix this messed up society we live in. And if you need help, we will always be there for you, go it. Deku softly nodded before falling into a dreamless sleep in the comfort of all his friends' family. Aizawa knew that everyone who entered in heroics would know the messed up cruelty in which they live in, but right now, that were just teenagers. Yet, they all perfectly understood the reality in which they live in. It was truly sad at how fast they had to grow up. Sad indeed. Today, Izuku woke up on the good side of the bed. Nothing in particular had happened that made him feel this giddy inside. But whether something happened or not, Izuku was happy. Yes, he might have been a little sleep deprived, but it was nothing. The 2 cups of coffee, no cream, no sugar, just the way Izuku liked it, couldn't fix. His morning run was finished with a beautiful sunrise, and then he got to eat breakfast with his class. It was the beginning of homeroom, and everyone could tell that their class cinnamon roll was in an especially bright mood. His smile alone made everyone in his class feel warm and happy inside. Even Bakugo and Aizawa weren't as moody as usual. "Okay class, today we are going to talk about..." But he was cut off with a phone ringing in his class. His eyes quickly locked onto Izuku, who was looking at his phone with a troubled expression. The phone number looked so familiar to Midoriya. He didn't have it in his contacts, but he felt like he's seen this number before. The number made him feel anxious, and he didn't know why. He hated feeling like this, especially since he couldn't pinpoint the reason. He looked up to see his teacher staring at him. Izuku gave a small smile. "I'm sorry, sensei, but I think this may be important. Can I answer it?" His teacher heavily sighed before relenting. "Just make it quick." Izuku quickly answered, not even bothering to leave the classroom, something he probably should have done, he later realized. "Is this Izuku Midoriya?" The voice made all the color drain from his face and send shivers down his spine. He didn't want to answer this man. He never wanted to ever hear his voice again. But his classmates were staring at him, and he didn't want them. No, they couldn't know. They probably wouldn't believe him anyway. No one ever did when he told people about this man. So he slowed his breath and clenched the phone tighter to keep his hands from shaking. "What do you want?" His voice came out weaker than he wanted it to be, and it made him sick. It was like before UA, when he was a quirkless, weak, abused kid who didn't know anything but loneliness and hate. His mother was the only salvage from that, but he was selfish. It wasn't enough. Not even a hello, or how are you doing? "I thought I raised you better than that, son." He hated how he called him son. He had no right to call him that. Izuku hated him. "Don't say you raised me, Hasashi. Now I'll ask one more time, what do you want?" He realized he was probably scaring his classmates with how cold and emotionless his voice sounded. But at the moment he didn't care. He'd rather sound cold and scary than terrified and weak, especially to his so-called father. "Midoriya, turn your phone to speaker." Deku snapped his gaze from the table to Aizawa and glared at him. Shouta didn't seem fazed, even though on the inside he was shocked, and just continues to stare at Izuku without breaking contact, knowing he probably wasn't going to get out of this one. Midoriya stood up and left the classroom with Aizawa in tow. Izuku hesitated before putting the speaker on. "I heard you got a quirk." At that moment, Izuku was flushed with anger. After all these years, after having to deal with all the trauma and scars alone, Hisashi calls because he got a quirk. He slightly calmed down when his teacher put a comforting hand on his shoulder. He forced himself to relax a bit and hold off the panic attack he sure was going to have after this. "Was it because of me? I did put a lot of time and effort into trying to force a quirk out of you, you know. It probably just took a while to develop. I did see how powerful it was. You should be thanking me." Was there something stronger than hate? Izuku thinks that whatever that was, he was feeling it right now. He was so angry and helpless. Memories he spent years trying to recover from came at him with full force. "Thank you. You seriously want me to thank you after all the abuse you put me through? All the thoughts you shoved into my head? All the scars you gave me, and you want me to thank you? I will never, ever thank you for making me go through all the things I had to go through alone. You aren't even the reason I got my quirk, for the record. Never call my mom or I ever again. We want nothing to do with you. Now would you kindly fuck off?" He nearly punched the hang button before collapsing onto the floor and making himself as small as possible. All the gathered burns, bruises, cuts that man gave him came back in loads of phantom pain. It was like he was reliving that whole hell all over again. It never seemed to stop. It was always at the back of his head, and he could never tell anyone, so he dealt with it alone. But he could only hold on for so long, right? There had to be some point in time where he just stopped. Was he allowed to do that? Where he just stopped being him, stopped being anyone? Maybe all of this was his fault. That's what his dad always told him. Everything always seemed like it was his fault. That he could have tried harder, done more, trained more. He was never enough, not even to his own self. Izuku, out of all the darkness and panic, he could still hear his teacher call him. "Everything's okay now. You're safe." But it wasn't. How could Aizawa say everything was okay when Izuku was struggling to do such a mundane task like breathing? His teacher was wrong. Izuku still had nightmares. He still flinches on his bad days. He still finds it so hard to trust people. How can everything be okay when I don't remember the last time I was? Is he just expected to move on? It's only been 2 weeks since Sir Night-Eye had died, 2 weeks since he failed. And everyone has seemed to have already moved on. But he's still stuck in the never-ending stream of nightmares. His mind won't give him a break. Always telling him what he should have done. How maybe if Izuku had just tried harder, Night-Eye might still be alive. Why hadn't Izuku died? He should have died. Izuku didn't get it. Night-Eye was far more important than Izuku will ever be. For a short time, Izuku thought that he might finally prove that he was useful, that he wasn't worthless. But he was useless and worthless, and he believed it with all his heart. Everyone smiled and laughed, and it all seemed so genuine. He felt sick to his stomach knowing that he was lying to his friends, to everyone. All of his smiles and laughs were fake. It was something he fell back into so easily even when he hadn't needed to do it in months. He considered talking to his friends about how messed up he was. He knew it would help, but his classmates already have a lot on their plate, burdens and worries they shouldn't even have yet. And Izuku would be damned if he added an extra burden to them. Wasn't he always a burden though? Would it be better if he just distanced himself from them? He even considered talking to Aizawa about how he felt. Was he even feeling anything? But he was already a problem and Izuku didn't want to add more reason to it. Izuku was trapped inside his own mind and he couldn't get out because how can you run from your mind? Izuku thought he was getting better, that he could get better, but was all that just the calm before the storm? Was this the final wave to the hell of his life? Midoryia Izuku was too much of a coward to say goodbye. He gave Mirio the quirk. After all, he was the one that deserved it, not him. He had lasted for as long as he could. He had held on to hope much longer than even he had expected. Izuku thought he was doing the world a favor, but he wasn't, for the tears shed that day were uncountable. That maybe if he was gone, the world would be eased with one less burden. Everyone's shoulders that day weighed so heavily that they thought they would be crushed. Izuku thought that he deserved this, that he could never be happy. Maybe even his death could make some people happy. No one was the same after that. For everyone, their life was filled with less light than before. No one had seen it coming. No one noticed how his eyes were emptied of life and how his smiles were fake. No one noticed when he had put distance between him and everybody. Izuku Midoryia wanted everyone to believe he was fine, and they did. Midoryia Izuku was dead and no one could change that. Izuku hates this. He hates being broken. Why couldn't he be normal? Will he ever be normal? What even is normal? Whatever it wasn't this. Normal isn't staying up until ungodly hours because your mind has a million thoughts and a million questions and there just isn't enough time to sort through them all. It's not like he's always like this, because he's not, or is he? Most days he can smile and laugh with all of his friends. Are they really his friends? Does he really have friends now? But then day turns into night and he wished he could sleep. Craves it. It's always the days when he's truly exhausted do the thoughts. The urges come back. Midoryia is better now, has been for a while. But some days, he misses the days when he used to cut into his skin like butter. Just how messed up was that? Wishing to be back to his lowest point. Sometimes being the way he is now happy feels so wrong. It's almost like he misses the sadness. It was a part of him for so long and then it wasn't. It made him feel empty in ways that he couldn't explain. In ways that terrified him. He couldn't stay here in his dorm. He's afraid that he might not be able to control himself this time and unscrew his pencil sharpener and do what he used to do every day, every night. He gets out of bed, dragging his blanket with him. He just needed to get out of here. Who cares if it's 2:30 and he should be asleep? The walk to the common room is short. He wouldn't go to the dorm roofs tonight. That would be too risky, too thrilling. The clouds in his head are far too heavy tonight and Izuku hardly even remembers exiting his room as he arrives to the common room. But he's not alone. The kitchen light is on and he sees a man with black hair hunched over staring at his computer screen. For a moment, Izuku considers turning back and going back to the confines of his room. But his room is dangerous, much more dangerous than his cranky but softy teacher. So Izuku slowly walks over, his blanket still wrapped around him, and pours himself a cup of coffee because there's no way he's going to sleep tonight. Might as well feel sort of awake than dead with exhaustion. He sits next to his teacher who closes his laptop and takes a sip of his own coffee. Why are you down here when you should be asleep? Izuku wants to retort by telling him he should be sleeping too, but the knives next to the sink catch his eyes and he can't look away. It's like they're teasing him with how sharp and shiny they look. Maybe, somehow, he can sneak one up to his room and… No, he can't do that. He's better now. Kid, you all right? With all the strength Izuku can muster, he rips his gaze away from the knives. How pathetic is that? It shouldn't have been that hard to do something as mundane as looking away from kitchen tools. Because that's what they are. Kitchen tools. But Izuku has twisted it into something else. Oh, how easy it would be to just fall back into that familiar dark rhythm. It would be as easy as blinking. Yeah, his voice is too quiet, too sad sounding. He tries to at least make his voice seem at least a little bit louder, but right now, Izuku doesn't have the strength. I just couldn't be in my dorm room tonight, so I thought I could just hang out down here for a while. Midoryia doesn't know when it happened, but his gaze has returned back to the knives. His legs start to tremble with the need to walk over there and slice his wrists. He could hold on. He just needed to last tonight and then things will be okay again. Why couldn't you stay in your dorm room? Izuku chugs the rest of his coffee and wants to get more. But the coffee pot is right next to the knives and Aizawa is here and he can't find out that Izuku is not normal. Too dangerous. Couldn't go to roof either. His words sound slurred and why did he say that now? Aizawa will want to know why and he can't know why. Heckin'. God, why was he so tired? Why was it dangerous? Midoryia doesn't miss how his teacher's voice seems to be a little bit more concerned than before. That night, thought common room would be safe. He crosses his arms on the tables and hides his head with them. It's the safest option and will constrict his eyes from gluing onto the sharp objects, the objects that beg to be carved into his skin. Why isn't it safe? Does he really want to answer that? Not really. Not at all, actually. Too many things to harm myself with. Izuku mumbles out without meaning to. Or maybe he does. He's not sure. But talking to Aizawa is making the screams from his wrists a little bit more easier to ignore. I don't want to do it again. But I'm broken. You're not broken, Izuku, Shouta states immediately. Yeah, I am. I mean, who wishes to go back to their lowest point? Who misses the sadness that used to swallow them whole every waking moment? Even now, it's so hard not to cut into my own skin. You're not broken. Even now, you're still fighting. You chose to come down here because you thought it would be safer for you. I'll say this one more time, you're not broken. Was he supposed to react to that? He didn't really know how. And strangely enough, all he could think about was how the coffee was not doing its job at keeping him awake. Thanks for talking to me, sensei. And his eyes are so heavy that he can't resist the urge to close them. He falls asleep and his mind isn't so loud anymore. But he isn't completely better. Not yet. He didn't know when it started. It wasn't immediate, but more like gradual. At first, you probably couldn't even tell that anything was wrong. Maybe he was just pushing himself extra hard, going that extra mile. Always. Then it started to get worse, and he didn't know what to do. He knew that this wasn't healthy. It was just so hard to explain. How do you explain that every time you try to eat, your mind screams at you? No, don't you dare eat. You're not hungry. But he was. He was so hungry. And when Izuku could fight the voices that were always there, never ending, and eat, he would lay in his bed during the depths of the night and think about how much he hated himself. And then, on his days where he can't stand the feeling of food in him, he'll go to the bathroom and stick 2 fingers down his throat. Izuku tried to fight it at first. He did, promise. But whatever this was, snuck up on him. Because at first it was extra training outside of school, which had been a comforting routine for him. But then that training turned into replacing it with sleep. He didn't need sleep, Izuku thought. He needed to get stronger. And somewhere along the way he started skipping dinner. And then he got used to the feeling of going to bed hungry. Izuku was still getting 2 meals a day. And Izuku still felt okay. Sure, he was exhausted from the nights where he didn't allow himself to sleep, but that was okay. It was just a small price to pay. Everything was fine. Until Izuku started to look. He looked at all these different bodies that were slimmer with more muscle than him. It started to become a routine, comparing other people to himself. He started to stand in the mirror and look, but he didn't see. All he thought was that he wasn't good enough, and that needed to change. Maybe, if he was just skinner and built more muscle, he would become good enough. But he didn't know how far he was supposed to go. How far was good enough? Would it be good enough? Would he ever know when he could stop? Or would Izuku just keep on going and going because he would never be good enough? Izuku started to train in the mornings. No one thought anything of it. No one knew just exactly how early he had gotten up. No one knew how late he had stayed up. But Izuku seemed fine, so they encouraged him, telling him how great he was doing and to keep on going. So he did. But every morning he fought an internal war in his mind. And the reason was of something as simple as breakfast. The thing is, Izuku knew he needed to eat. He knew that if he were starving like he was, the normal human action would be to eat. Breakfast was something he forced himself to eat every day. If the only reason was to stop his shaking, well, nobody needed to know. But then he started to skip it. It was okay though, because he still had lunch. And it's not like he skipped breakfast all the time. Just on the days where he forced himself to look at the cold reflection of the mirror for a tiny bit too long and would have ran late to class if he didn't skip it. He refused to think that he was doing that on purpose. That he started to get ready for school at a slower pace just so he could skip it. Izuku started to limit lunch soon enough. And the most twisted part of it, he was proud of it. He was proud at the agonizing pains of his stomach. Because he was in control. He couldn't trust his own body. It was impossible or Izuku, because what if Izuku's body failed him? After all, his mind was telling him that it wasn't enough, that right now, Izuku was worthless. Izuku ignored the clumps of hair that would greet him on his pillow like little presents. He ignored his chapped, bleeding lips and the new scars on his fingers. He ignored that he was always cold, no matter how many blankets he placed upon himself until it almost suffocated him. He ignored the concerned glances and the shaky limbs. He disregarded all of the warning signs, because he was doing great, right? This wasn't just about being skinny enough, it was about all that self-hatred for yourself. That maybe if your body is skinny enough, pretty enough, strong enough, you'll learn to love yourself too. But starving, the urge to know just how far you can go, is addicting. And soon enough, Izuku figured out that he couldn't get out of this like he thought he could. He thought that once he liked where he was at, he could stop this utter destruction of his body. He soon finds out that he can't, because he doesn't know how to. He's become too reliant on it. And he doesn't know if he can let go. He wants to stop, he really, truly does. But he doesn't know how to, doesn't think he ever will. Izuku never thinks about telling people about his struggles. Was he really struggling? Izuku thought he was in control, and if he did, he would think that they wouldn't be able to do anything anyways. He was far too gone, far too deep into his own mind. But it was possible, and people were starting to get worried, starting to realize that this wasn't normal, wasn't healthy. But they hoped that this could go away on its own, that maybe this was just a phase. Izuku knew that he was far too gone, so all he could do was do the things he's been doing. But now, he was no longer proud of himself. He was in pain and he wanted it to stop. He didn't think it would last this long. Now he thinks it will last forever, until his heart give out. This has been going on for almost a year now, and Izuku didn't know how much more he could take. No one but Nezu and Detective Tsukachi knew about his secret mission. At the time, he was buzzing with excitement and happiness that he, once quirkless, was now attending at the most prestigious hero school in Japan. Izuku had jumped at the opportunity to help out with the investigation of the League of Villains. Now, all he wants to do is scream at his past self, to tell him, no, don't do this. It'll ruin you even more than you already are. But they had said he was their best option, that his help will be essential to figuring the depths of the LOV. Not to mention that his past quirklessness made for a good origin story, or whatever you call it. That if Izuku told his past to the League, they would understand why he wanted to be a villain. That it would be easier for them to accept him into the League. And now that Izuku is actually thinking, he realized that Nezu and the detective told him that he was suited to be a villain. That it would have made sense. The worst part is that it does make sense. And that just somehow makes everything so much worse. The League had made him do horrible, horrible things. No, they didn't make him kill anybody or torture someone to the brink of insanity. They made him experiment. Tear corpses open and mess with their organs. Inject quirks into their dead, cold bodies and see if there was any reaction. Izuku would never forget as the images of it all had been printed into his mind. Bodies tearing themselves up, bodies enveloping and twisting until it was an entirely different shape, bodies exploding, blood and chunks of flesh flying everywhere uncontrollably. Every time he closed his eyes he would see it, and Izuku fears that they will never truly go away. Not like he deserves them to, anyways. Being with the League, analyzing them, has twisted his mind into thinking he was a monster. How could he do all of these things? Don't worry, Nezu says. It's not like they're alive anyways. Besides, you're helping us, and not be a monster. Izuku had woven himself far too deep into this to ever get out, to ever be himself again. He was living two separate lives and it just felt so wrong. The guilt from lying to his friends and teachers, oh God. All Might didn't even know. His mother didn't know. They would be so disappointed in him. Was eating him alive because every day one of them would ask why he looked so tired. Why were his hands shaking? The blood wasn't leaving. Why wasn't it leaving? So much that he had dropped his pencil. Oh, don't worry. I just missed breakfast. You know me. I was training so much that I lost track of time and didn't get to bed until pretty late. I'll be fine. I'll try extra hard next time, promise. The lies that he had painted spilled so easily from his mouth that it physically sickened him. Midoryia lost count of how many times he woke up from a nightmare memories. They were memories and puked his guts out. He began to think why he was even trying to be a hero when he has done all of these horrendous things. Soon, the League is going to want more from him. He's terrified for what they will make him do. What if they want him to kidnap someone? Or what if they want him to experiment on a living person? What if they make him kill someone? Izuku doesn't want to think of the day where they might ask him to do that. He'd rather die than do any it. Hell, he kind of wished he was dead right now. What are you doing up so late, problem child? A very familiar grouchy voice asked. Izuku had forgotten where he was for a short moment. He had gone down to the common room to grab a pot of coffee and maybe even find a way to escape his mind. Of course, that didn't work, and he only seemed to spiral more. Looking at the clock, Midoryia saw that it was 3 a.m. He'd been down here for 2 hours already. Moving his gaze to his teacher, something inside him cracked. He wanted to tell him, anybody about what was happening, what he had become, but he couldn't. All of this was classified. Nobody was supposed to know. But he was broken. And why couldn't he ever ask for help when all he did was give it? Aizawa. He had hardly said anything and he already wanted to cry, but Izuku hadn't truly cried in such a long time. He trained himself to numb out that sadness, but tonight everything came out, drowning him. Haven't ever seen anyone ever look so fragmented and demoralized. Shouta quickly took a seat next to his student and gave him something that meant the world to Izuku. Help. I don't know if I can do this anymore. I thought I could handle it, but I didn't know at the time. I was so stupid and you should probably just expel. Aizawa urgently cuts him off. Kid, slow down. I won't expel you, okay? Just start from the start and we'll go from there, okay? Izuku takes a deep breath and nods. He clenched his fist so hard that his nail dig into his skin, causing some blood to come out. Aizawa cups his hand onto one of Izuku's hand, causing him to relax. At the beginning of the school year, I had agreed to help get information from the League by pretending to be a villain. It was silent for a very long time. The only sound that could be heard was the breathing of the two and the ticking of the clock. You what? I was just so happy that I had been accepted into this school that I wasn't really thinking when Nezu and Tsukachi asked if I could help them. And no one had asked me to ever help them with something before. And that just clouded my judgment even more. They told me that I had the most potential being a villain considering my past and that the LOV wouldn't have as much trouble with welcoming me in. Sensei, I was so stupid. And now, I don't know what to do. Aizawa for the first time in years was speechless. So many emotions had enveloped him that it was difficult to sort them out. But one was prominent, just barely boiling above the surface, and that was anger. Pure, unadulterated anger. Kid, Izuku, you're only a child. And the fact that Nezu had asked you to do a highly dangerous, potentially deadly mission is wrong. And the fact that they asked you to do this when at least Nezu knew that you were emotionally inept to thoroughly think about it makes it even worse. Izuku was now crying, snot and tears running down his face. But Aizawa, I'm a monster. Every time I close my eyes I see all the blood. All the things I've done and I'm terrified that they will never go away. A part of me thinks that I don't even deserve for the images to fade. I experimented on corpses and why? Why is the world so cruel? Why was the world so cruel? And why was it so cruel to Midoryia Izuku? It wasn't fair. He shouldn't have had to gone through half of the things he has, let alone this. You're not a monster. You were left no choice and all you wanted to do was help. Which all that got you was to be surrounded in a corner. No one helped you then, but I promise I'll help you now. I'll get you out of this. Izuku looked up, his eyes sparkling with tears. Aizawa's heart broke at the sight. You will. The hero nods, not an inch of hesitation in it. I will. Do you know when you have to go back? Tomorrow night. I'll be back by morning. Why had Nezu let a kid destroy himself like this? After this was all over, Aizawa was going to steal some whiskey from Nimiri's stash and maybe even let Kota and Ri hang out with Deku. The kid needed some child innocence in his life. Do you think you could do one more night? And then you'll never have to go back again. Izuku nodded. A newfound determination forming into his features. Aizawa wondered how long he had to act as if nothing was wrong, that he wasn't risking his life and overall mental state every week. Okay, now you should go to bed. Hell knows how messed up your sleep schedule is. Izuku gets up and sends a lazy grin his way like you're one to talk, sensei. Aizawa returns a rare smile and right before Izuku starts going up the stairs, Aizawa stops him. Midoryia, I want you to know how proud I am of you. You did the right thing in telling me. Thank you, Aizawa. Aizawa takes a sip of his coffee as his problem child leaves to get some much-deserved sleep. So many people have failed his child and he would be damned if he would too. He will help this kid even if it means he had to tear down the wall of UA himself. What the hell were you thinking? Aizawa shouted, slamming his hands on the table. He was livid, and nothing could calm him down. Logically. I was thinking logically, Nezu said in a sadistically calm voice, not even sparing the man a glance as he continued to work on his papers. Logically, you asked a 14-year-old boy to risk his life with little to no training. 14. I don't see much of a problem here, Aizawa. After all, he had agreed, didn't he? There were so many things that were messed up about this situation. It was uncountable. But even so, Aizawa would try his best to tell the person sitting in front of him every single one. Yes, he did agree. But you knew that he wasn't in the right state of mind to make such a decision. He shouldn't even been allowed to make it in the first place. He's far too young. The principal let out a cackle, as if he had anticipated that response. Maybe I did know that, but you know me. I have such a hard time with human emotions. And what's wrong with a little bit of manipulation? Nezu still didn't look up. Aizawa was beyond pissed. Shouta doesn't think he's ever been this angry before. His anger was like an endless inferno, just waiting for someone to get too close. And someone did, manipulating him like that. You might as well have ripped his heart out. Do you even know what the league is making him do? Shouta was fully aware that the principal had a hard time understanding human emotions, but at least he was educated on them. He should know what the cost of this would be. Nezu had turned a child into a soldier. He had sacrificed a teenager's mental health, and from Aizawa's analyzing, Izuku's mental health was already rocky at the beginning of the year for the sake of what? A little information. They had plenty of heroes that would be great at that. Oh, I'm well aware of what they are making Midoryia do. I just can't see what the big deal is. They are dead after all. Aizawa cooled his expression. If anger didn't work, maybe being calm would be more effective. He had a promise to keep. He couldn't fail no matter what. You do understand that Midoryia will never be the same after this, right? He's going to be scarred for the rest of his life with whatever they had him do to the corpses. You even told him that it would have made sense if he had become a villain. It's true, you don't understand the full extent and power behind human emotions, but what you're doing is immorally wrong. This had somehow gained the principal's attention and he finally had the decency to look up. Aizawa continued, if Izuku keeps on doing this, the villains will for sure start making him do more. It won't just be dead people anymore. Surely, with your IQ quirk and all, you would have at least thought about that. And if you can't even come to terms with that, then what if this gets out? You're treating a student like a mindless, emotionless puppet. The press would eat this up and you would most likely get fired. UA could even get shut down. Not mention Izuku's mother. She doesn't even know about this, which has to be illegal. Nedzu's eyes looked calculating and sparkled with something Aizawa would rather not know. He just hoped that he had gotten through to him. His kid didn't deserve this. Izuku should be living a normal teenage life. Well, at least as normal as you can get for someone who's training to be a hero. Midoryia already had a lot of weight and expectations on his shoulders. He didn't need this on top of it too. Aizawa and Nedzu never dropped eye contact, neither willing to give in. After an eternity, the animal finally dropped his gaze back to his papers. All right, I suppose I can pick someone new, if it's that important to you. After a minute, Nedzu added, and it won't be a child this time. I'll pick a suited hero for this job. Although it's such a shame, young Midoryia was doing so well. With a stern nod, Shouta walked out of the door. He looked at the clock to see that the problem child had probably already snuck off to the LOV. How he snuck out so often without anybody ever noticing, Shouta didn't know. He guessed Izuku probably got help from Nedzu. Now all Midoryia had to do was make it through this night with no casualties and then everything will better. Izuku could finally get on the road towards happiness again. All they had to do was last a few hours. We're going to have you do something else today. Shigaraki's raspy voice echoed throughout the bar. Of course it had to be today. Izuku struggled to maintain a calm composure as the words rang in his head like broken bells. Oh, and what is that? He was in a room of villains. They had years of practice to develop their character, to notice the slightest shift in someone else's. The outcomes of that could be good or bad. But for him, nothing about that was good. Well, you see, we had recently found out that someone was betraying us. Oh, that couldn't be good. Even if it wasn't him, this whole thing equals disaster. Toga interrupts Tamura as she starts jumping excitedly. We want you to kill him. How fun is that? Zuzu, could you please cover him in blood? Pretty please. No. He couldn't kill someone, no matter how evil they were. Killing was wrong. He'd rather die than end someone's life. Dabai stepped in. If you don't kill him, then you are showing us that you aren't serious enough to be a part of the league. And then you'll leave us with no choice but to kill him in the most painful way we can think of. They were setting him up. They probably knew he wouldn't kill anyone. Not without a little threat. He could make it quick. Izuku could make it painless so he wouldn't have to suffer for too long. Damn it, he wished a hero could come in and save him. He didn't care which one. He just wanted someone to come and help him. To tell him that everything will be okay. But that didn't happen, no matter how much Izuku wished on it. How do you want me to kill him? Shigaraki smirked. With your quirk. We don't really care how, just as long as you use your quirk. The quirk that All Might had given him. The quirk that was meant to save, not kill. Izuku could feel something inside him break, and he wondered if it was the past users begging him to not do this. Anything other than this. For the first time since he got One for All, Izuku wished he had stayed quirkless. Got it. It felt like he was a mindless puppet. He wanted to be anywhere but here. Hell seemed better than this good-for-nothing bar. Midoryia walked into the room where they were keeping the traitor and saw him tied up in a chair. He looked to be mid-20s, so young. They were both too young and his eyes were screaming terror. He struggled to get out of the chair, but to no avail. Izuku noticed that the league didn't follow him in. He was slightly grateful about that. Izuku didn't want anyone else to see this. Please, don't do this. I have children that I need to take care of. That's why I betrayed the league. They offered me money that I couldn't pass off. Please, I'm their only family left. Izuku wanted to puke his guts out and never eat again. He knew that the league wouldn't care if this guy had children. And the man knew that too. If Izuku didn't do this, the league would do a whole lot worse. Izuku leaned close to the man's ear and gently whispered, "Tell me your children's names and I'll make sure they get somewhere safe." The man instantly stopped struggling and calmed down. Izuku choked on his tears. The man didn't even care for his own well-being. He only cared for his children's safety. Lilith and Kikihoshi. Izuku nodded and put one hand on each side of the man's face. "I'm so sorry." All the man did was smile and close his eyes. Izuku let himself activate One for All, green sparks flying around him. He was only using 5%, yet it hurt so much. It was like he was getting stabbed over and over again. Nothing like the usual warmth that enveloped him when he used it. Izuku forced his eyes to stay open. He wouldn't allow himself to close his eyes. He deserved to watch, have this memory ingrained into his mind, to have his guilt matched with images. Without much effort, Izuku twisted. A loud snap echoed through the room as Izuku looked at the man's dead eyes. He truly didn't deserve to be a hero. It was 6 in the morning and his problem child still hadn't returned. His other kids were starting to come down to the common room, and with each new person, Shouta's anxiety increased. Izuku should be back by now, so why wasn't he? Aizawa drummed his fingers against the kitchen counter as he kept looking towards the door, anywhere where Izuku might pop in. The student seemed to sense his obvious distress. Was he just doing a poor job at hiding it? or did they just know him well enough? Since they were all looking at him worriedly. Just as Uraraka was about to ask what was wrong, the doors to the main entrance had slammed open. And there he was, Midoryia Izuku. The tension was released from his shoulders until it came back tenfold at the sight of the kid. Izuku looked worse than death. In fact, Izuku almost looked like he wanted death to come up to him and swallow him whole. Midoryia walked up to him, ignoring everyone else. Aizawa thought that maybe Izuku couldn't even register anybody else at the moment. He looked so much worse than 2 nights ago. The league probably made him do something horrible. Once his problem child had made it up to him, Izuku's eyes gleamed with tears. Shoto looked at him and instantly pulled him into a hug. "Don't worry, kid. You won't ever have to go back there again." Izuku clutched onto Aizawa's capture weapon and sobbed. It made everyone in the room want to cry at how broken and empty it sounded. Even Bakugo was struggling with holding his tears back. He had never heard Deku sound so absolutely shattered before. "Aizawa, I don't deserve to be a hero. And not after what I did." Thankfully, Izuku didn't need anyone to ask him what had happened as he continued. "They left me no choice. If I didn't do it, they would have made his death so much more painful. You were wrong, I am a monster." Aizawa just held him tighter in hope to whatever god that may exist, that everything will be okay again. That maybe this was just a bad dream. Sensei, they made me kill someone with my own quirk. I am a horrible, useless, sorry excuse for a human. He even had children. I promised I would take care of them, but I should have done more. Why couldn't I have done more? It was impossible to not cry at this point. Even though the class didn't know what led to this, they still couldn't help the hate swell through their stomachs at whoever made their light of the class dim to a flicker. "Midoryia, you are not a monster." Todoroki spoke up, his rage barely being contained through sealed teeth. Aizawa released Izuku from the hug and grabbed both of his shoulders, making eye contact him. Izuku's eyes were dull and glassy at the same time. It was like Midoryia was so close to just letting go of the ledge and giving up, yet he was still holding on. There was nothing else you could have done. You did the most heroic thing by promising to look after his children and making his death quick. You did something I know a lot of people couldn't have done. Izuku shakes his head frantically. That can't be right. There has to be something else I could have done. Something that wouldn't have led to anyone dying. God damn it, Deku. Don't you understand? If you had tried anything else, that man would be wishing he was dead. Sheet, you could have fucking died. Katsuki declared, just daring anyone to argue against him. Midoryia, Shouta said, you can be a hero. You know why? It's because you already are one. Everyone nodded in agreement at their sensei's words. Izuku was probably the most heroic one out of all of them, and he deserved the title of a hero. This created a new onslaught of tears for Izuku, and that was okay. It was okay to cry and not be okay. So Midoryia let the tears run down his face until his eyelids began to feel like dumbbells. The temptation was far too much for the exhausted teen, and he fell asleep in his teacher's arms. Everything is going to be okay, Shouta whispered. I promise. It was the start of class, and everybody was tense. They had all noticed the missing green-haired sunshine that was normally always early. Everyone was worried. Midoryia had never missed a day of school before, even when he was sick. Aizawa-sensei, where's Deku-kun? Uraraka had asked, twiddling with her thumbs. I was getting to that. On his way back from visiting his mother, the problem child had accidentally gotten hit by a de-aging quirk by a child who had just manifested their quirk. He looks to be around the age of a middle schooler. As Aizawa said this, he didn't fail to notice the paling of Bakugo's face. You can come in now, Midoryia. The gigantic door softly opened to reveal Midoryia. Only it wasn't the Izuku they knew. This one was shorter and as skinny as a stick. In fact, it was almost worrying at how skinny he was. He had his UA clothes on that were way too big on him. His sleeves going past his hands and his pants were being dragged against the floor. His shoulders were as high as they could be, trying to shield his face away from all the curious eyes. They're judging you. They hate you. Useless piece of. He glued his eyes down to the floor because if he didn't look at them, he might get lucky and then they won't hate him as much. Izuku made his way to Aizawa. It was the eraser hat. He couldn't believe he was in the same room as him, and stood behind him. He didn't understand why he was here, why he was in the most prestigious hero school in all of Japan. He didn't belong here. Aizawa was a hero, but he was also a teacher, and if Izuku knew anything at all, he knew for a fact that teachers weren't meant to be trusted, at least when it involved him. Midoryia took a careful step away from Shouta. Aizawa glanced at him questionably. Shouta had to remind himself that this wasn't the problem child he was used to. This Midoryia was almost the exact opposite of the one he had come to see as his own kid, not that he would admit it. Never. This, Aizawa said, gesturing to the entire class who all gave hesitant smiles. Is your class, Midoryia? You're a part of class 1 and are training to be a hero. Bakugo internally cringed at this. There was no way this was going to go down well. Aizawa, Bakugo spoke up, trying to ignore the burning green eyes staring right at him. Maybe we should wait for the shitty quirk to wear off before he goes back to fucking class. Izuku was slowly backing up towards the door, trying to get out. All of this had to be a prank, or some really twisted nightmare that just wanted to break him further than he already was. As he was backing up, he bumped into what had seemed to be a wall. When he turned around, he saw All Might himself. "Ah, young Midoryia, I heard of the little mishap you had this morning, but I reassure you, it should wear off in a few hours." All Might was talking to him. Never mind that, he knew his name. It was all too much. He didn't understand any of it. Why were all of these people looking at him in worry and kindness? It didn't make any sense. He didn't deserve their worry or kindness. He was half tempted to just jump out of the window because everything was starting to blur together and nothing made sense. How could he be a hero when he didn't even have a quirk? When his mom didn't support him on his dream, and his dad left because of how worthless he was. He flinched violently when a hand had laid itself on his shoulder. Izuku whipped around to come face to face with a worried Aizawa. A teacher worried about him. Yeah, this had to be some messed up dream. The only thing that made sense was that Kaken was here, but even he was looking at him with worry and not hate. Izuku kind of wished Kaken was looking at him with spite just so it could be a little bit more realistic. Stop. His voice was sad yet hollow at the same time. Some students even gave a gasp at how broken it sounded. It was nothing like the bright, happy voice they came to recognize and love. This has to be some nightmare, right? Cause there's no way I got into UA. Deku-kun, Uraraka spoke up, flinching as Izuku looked at her with panicked eyes. You are in this class, and you are training to be a hero. Deku. So useless. Might as well just kill your Izuku. Everyone turned stock still as Katsuki yelled out his name. No one has ever heard Bakugo yell out Midoriya's real name. Some had even speculated that he didn't even know his real name. Izuku's dazed eyes began focused again at the familiar voice. It was better, but everyone could tell he was still panicked. Izuku, you have to calm down. All of this is real. Izuku's eyes softened, a good sign, but then they turned immensely sad again. So if this is all true, then does that mean I got a quirk? That my mom finally accepted my dream and encourages me? Izuku shakes his head, as if to throw away all of those hopeful thoughts, that can't be true. After all, how can someone as pathetic and impotent as me ever even hope to become a hero? Young Midoryia, I want you to know that you can be a hero. What? You will make a great hero someday, young Midoryia. So many people believe in you. Now all you need to do is believe in yourself. People believe in me. No one has ever believed in him before. People never thought that he could do anything and that he was weaker than glass. Izuku had gotten so used to it that he never thought that things could be any different. Of course we do, Midabro. A guy with red, spiky hair said. Izuku didn't really get the whole bro nickname, but he seemed really nice and welcoming. In fact, everyone seemed to have this warmth about them that he didn't know he had the capability to even feel. Izuku badly wanted to open his arms and trust these people, but how could he? Everyone he's ever formed any kind of connection with has betrayed him in one form or another. And if he was really supposed to be a high schooler at the moment, does that mean his older self learned to trust? Izuku didn't deem that very likely, but it could be possible. Or maybe he still hasn't learned to trust and he still thinks that no one actually cares for him. Both thoughts terrify him. Midoriya thinks it would be idiotic to trust people when all that's ever got them was pain and pain and pain. And if his older self still doesn't trust these people, sooner or later he will start to warm up to them. A rush of blind anger flows through him. He hates the fact that he doesn't see a possibility where he is somehow happy. People like him don't deserve to be happy. And how am I supposed to trust you? I just don't see a possibility where I can ever trust anyone. If my older self trusts you guys, well, then I must have gone stupid. Izuku was left exhausted by the end of small rant. He was so mad at himself. These people seemed so caring and so very nice. They probably hate him now. His chances of ever having normal friends are over, and even if he is friends with them as his older self, he knows for a fact that he ruined it. I'm so sorry. You guys probably all hate me now, right? It's okay, I understand. I hate myself too. Izuku's eyes were blurring around the edges and his eyes were getting heavier by the second. He was exhausted. He's been exhausted for as long as he could remember. Izuku just hopes that once he wakes up again, everything will be lighter. Izuku woke up in a very familiar white room. He wondered what happened this time, just what trouble he had to stir on to land here. Deku looked around only to see practically his entire class squished together in the room. They all looked at him in concern and some of them even looked like that had cried not too long ago. Izuku offers them a bright sunny smile. After all, they must have wasted a lot of time here waiting for him to wake up. Hi guys, I'm really sorry if I worried any of you. Although, I don't really know what exactly happened, he said while sheepishly rubbing the back of his head. You were hit by a de-aging quirk, problem child. You were reverted back to when you were in middle school. Midoriya winced at that. Middle school. Well, that wasn't a good time for him. Anything before meeting All Might was exactly a good time if he was being honest. Izuku knows he's not over everything that has happened to him while being quirkless. He'll still have both physical and mental scars from pre-1 for all for a long time. Oh, that's all you have to say, nerd. You fucking told us that you hated your shitty little self and that you'll never fucking trust us. What else am I supposed to say, Kaken? Oh, I'm so sorry that you had to see me at the lowest point of my life. Kudos to you guys, because you finally learned just how messed up I am. Sorry, Kaken, but I'm pretty sure everyone knows by now that I'm fucked up. I don't exactly need to say it. Everyone was stunned into silence. The truth was, no one had ever really paid attention to the green-haired boy. Not in the way that the boy so desperately needed. They paid attention to his power, friendliness, and happiness. No one paid attention to the days where he would come to class with bags under his eyes from overthinking his self-worth and if his friends were actually his friends and not people who just wanted something. No one ever noticed how he would constantly apologize, even for things he didn't do. No one noticed him. At least, not entirely. No one knew what to do, what to say, how to act. So they all stood there, waiting for someone to save the boy that didn't know how to trust. A little part 3 of Can't He Ask for Help. All Might and Izuku were sitting on the sand of Dagaba Beach. The only thing that could be heard was the waves hitting the soft sand and the small sniffing of Midoryia. Izuku had just finished telling Yagi about everything that had happened, everything he did in the past year. Izuku was waiting for All Might to process everything, but the longer he took, the harder it was to breathe. He was waiting for Yagi-san to say the words that he deserved, the words that he had prepared for months to hear. You failed me. I can't believe I ever thought you could be a hero. Those words had haunted his dreams for such a long time that it had bled into reality, or what Izuku thought it would be someday. He had killed someone. He didn't deserve the warmth All Might gave him. Midoryia, my boy. Izuku scrunched up his shoulders in preparation for what's sure to come. I am so sorry that I wasn't there for you. Izuku snapped his gaze to meet his mentor's. Because that was not what Izuku was expecting. He was expecting to have his hero career over, have his dreams ripped away from him just before he could taste it. Toshinori smiled at him. It was bright even when he was in his original form. I should have been there for you. I want you to know that I will never be disappointed in you, especially for something that you had absolutely no control over. I promise you, we'll get through this, together. Izuku offered a watery smile. It was amazing what few words can do to you, because All Might was right. They will get through this, together. Izuku hated Christmas. Well, not the holiday per se, but the day itself. He never really cared for the holiday. Anyways, Izuku never had anyone to celebrate it with, so it never really ever mattered to him. Christmas was the one time a year where his mother let herself become not motherly. She got so drunk that she wouldn't even remember anything the next morning, but Izuku knew that she knew what she did to him. Izuku never got presents on Christmas, nor did he get to build gingerbread houses or wear ugly sweaters. No, he got punches and screams and scars. Izuku was never sure what the reason for this was, but it has been happening since he was diagnosed as quirkless, or maybe it was a year before, right after his father left because he was such a disgrace. In all honesty, Izuku didn't care when it started. It shouldn't have even started in the first place. It might have been because his mother is still angry at him for making his father leave, or maybe it was because he was always a failure, even before he was diagnosed as useless to the world. All Izuku knew was that Christmas was the one time a year where his mother got to unleash all of her negative feelings towards him, the one time she could be herself. And what the worst part was that every year he hoped that things would be different this time. And just like the year before all the others, his hopes got crushed as he watched her empty bottle after bottle. This year would be different, though. It was Izuku's first year at UA and the first year where he had friends. Right before break, they were going to have a Christmas party in the common room. Midoryia had gotten a gift for everyone in Class 1A. Most of them were handmade and he had clearly put a lot of thought in each of them. Deku even got Christmas gifts for Aizawa, Yamada, All Might, and Eri. He was beyond excited to celebrate Eri's first Christmas party with her. He wanted to make sure it was nothing like his. It was the night of the party and Izuku was both excited and nervous. He's never been to a Christmas party before and doesn't really know what to expect. He was also dreading tomorrow morning since that's the day he would have to go home for winter break. Inko was working every day except Christmas, so he will be all alone. He tried to look on the bright side and think about all the extra training he would be able to do. Maybe he could even hang out with his friends instead of hide in his room like he did all the other years. Once the party had started, Izuku couldn't stop smiling. Everything was just so bright and cheerful. Izuku had wished he had experienced more of this during the holidays instead of cold, blank darkness. He was chatting to Uraraka about what she was doing during the break when Eri excitedly ran up to him with her arms open wide. Izuku automatically opened his arms and picked her up, swinging the girl around. Eri's laughter was like beautiful bells to Izuku. He wanted to make sure that tonight was filled with laughter and happiness for Eri. She deserved it after all she's been through. Deku Nai. Izuku smiled at the name. When Eri found out what a brother was in that family could be more than just blood, she had taken to calling Izuku Deku, something that made Midoriya smile every time he heard it. Yes, Eri-chan, Izuku asked, placing Eri back onto the ground. It's just that there's so much. It's so pretty and colorful. I also made you this, Deku. Eri pulled out a small card from her pocket and shyly handed it to him. Izuku crouched down next to Eri as he looked at the card. It was a crayon drawing of him and her holding hands. When he opened it, it said Merry Christmas. Izuku slightly chuckled when he saw Trick or Treat scribbled out on the top. Izuku turned to face her and smiled. Thank you, Eri-chan. It's beautiful. Now reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a red string bracelet with the word smile on it. Here, this is for you. Eri gasped as Izuku slid it onto her wrist. It says smile. Whenever you're having a hard time trying to smile, look at this to remind you that I will always be here to help bring a smile to your face. Eri's face developed a blinding smile that made Izuku's heart melt. She gently threw her arms around him for a hug, and Izuku gladly returned it. Thank you so much, Deku. I'm going to show Lemillion this. And with that she was off, quietly running towards Mirio, who was talking with Tamaki. He stood up from his crouched position and saw Yamada and Aizawa coming towards him. All Might already having to retire for the night, so he wasn't here. Thank you, little listener, for giving her a present. Yamada smiled at him. Tim and Yamada had a special connection that had developed before they had even noticed. Izuku knew sign, so whenever Hisashi had his hearing aids off, they could still communicate with each other. It was really helpful for when Izuku just couldn't bring himself to talk to anyone, but still wanted to have conversations with someone. Yes, thank you, problem child. She's really happy about it. Aizawa spoke, a barely hidden smile between his capture weapon. Izuku smiled, although it was a little strained. The weight that Christmas was only a few short days dragging lower and lower the later it got. It wasn't a problem at all. It's the least I could do for her. Eri-chan deserves the best. They both agreed and handed Izuku a cup of eggnog, non-alcohol, of course. There's no way Izuku would ever drink alcohol after he's seen what it could do that he didn't notice they were carrying. Thank you, Izuku said after grabbing the red cup. He looked at his phone and sighed as he saw the time. It was late, and he had to get up early tomorrow. His eyes growing dark at the thought that this party couldn't last forever. He had already given everybody their presents, so nothing was keeping him here. Still, he wished this night could last forever just so he wouldn't have to face another yearly beating. He knew this one was going to be bad. Every year all they seemed to do was get worse. It got harder every year to hide the scars that he would obtain from Christmas. Everything all right, problem child? Aizawa asked with a watchful gaze. But beneath that was concern. Yamada nodded in agreement. Yeah, you look kind of down in the dumps. Izuku laughed at that saying. He guessed he could say that he was down in the dumps, but that was just above the surface stuff. Yeah, I'm fine. I should be going to bed soon, have to get up early. Have any fun plans for Christmas, little listener? Izuku winced at that, something both teachers took in mind. Midoriya had never had a teacher ask him that before, so he never had to worry about an answer. In fact, he's never had a teacher show any interest in what he does at all unless if they thought he was cheating on a test or provoking the other students, of course. Izuku attempted to hide his wince with an awkward chuckle, rubbing the back of his head with his hand. Well, not really I guess. I'm not a big fan of Christmas anyways. Izuku doesn't fail to notice the look Yamada and Aizawa share at each other when he completed his mumbling. And why is that, Midoriya? Shouta has an analytical gaze, meaning that he's trying to figure out something that Izuku does not want him to know. Izuku shrugs and makes a show of checking the time on his phone again. I don't know. I just don't. Anyways, I better head off to bed. I hope you guys have an amazing Christmas. He then walks off to say goodbye to everyone before his teachers could question them any further. He was right when he said it was going to be bad. Even with a quirk, you're still so useless. He shouldn't have expected anything else, really. He just thought that maybe, since he had a quirk now, they could actually celebrate Christmas together. She threw a wine bottle at him, shards sticking themselves into his side. He didn't risk pulling them at the risk of bleeding out, so he kept them in, even when the pain became too much. It wasn't even Christmas yet. It was Christmas Eve. Inko had come home. It wasn't his home anymore and decided to start her drinking early, which only meant she would start the beating early. I hate you, Inko said as she used her quirk to hit him with a vase, putting shards into his back. Izuku resisted the urge to cry out. It only made her want to cause him more pain. He was limping outside now, trying not to pass out from exhaustion and pain. He didn't want to know what would happen if he closed his eyes longer than a blink. He didn't want to think he might die. I am so sick of you. I can't believe I put up with you for this long, you useless, pathetic child. He was trying to make his way to the dorms. That's where Aizawa and Yamada were. They might be able to help him. They wouldn't be like his mother Inko. She's no longer his mother, right? They don't think of him as useless and pathetic, right? He wouldn't blame them if they did. That's it. Her voice was colder than ice. Izuku knew that that sound would haunt his dreams for a long time after all of this was over. "You're out. I don't want to see you near this house ever again." "Got it." 5 minutes later, Izuku had packed all of his essentials. Thankfully, most of his stuff was at the dorms and left. He couldn't even say goodbye. Midoryia had ran out of tears a long time ago, whether it was because of dehydration or the fact everything just felt so numb. After an hour, it usually took 15 minutes, he finally made it to UA. Once he made it in, he dragged his feet as fast as they could towards the teacher's dorm. He'd be safe there, he just had to make it. It wouldn't be long, just a few more minutes. How long had he been bleeding? He brushed the thought away. He could see the entrance to the teacher's dorm. Izuku quickened his pace. Even though it hurt, everything hurt. God, living hurt. Izuku hastily, but weakly, knocked. He just hoped that someone would answer, that someone would help him escape this never-ending nightmare. But did he even deserve to be saved? Izuku didn't have the time or energy to think about that. The door opened, revealing Yamada-sensei. Azashi's confused face morphed onto one of horror and concern. Izuku. Midoryia had never heard his teacher say his first name, let alone sound so worried. Izuku wished he could greet him back, but he couldn't. His mouth was numb and he was so tired. He was safe now, right? That means he could close his eyes, if only for a little while. That should be okay, right? Yamada quickly caught the boy, screaming out Shouda's name. This was serious. The boy had multiple puncture wounds and had been bleeding for who knows how long. Azashi laid Izuku onto his lap and checked for a pulse. Thankfully, it was still there, but it was weak. Yamada had a hard time controlling his tears as he saw the tear marks and bruises on his kid's face. "Zashi, what the fuck happened?" Shouda yelled out as he immediately took out his phone to call Recovery Girl. After getting word from Chiyo that she was on her way, he hung up and rushed to his problem child. "What happened to you, Izuku?" The first thing Izuku registered when he woke up was that he was warm. He snuggled deeper into the pile of warmth even when he felt something weird around his chest. They felt oddly like bandages, but Izuku's brain didn't fully make the connection as it was still enveloped in muffled tiredness. That is, until the memories of everything came rushing back. Izuku snapped his eyes open and hopped out of the warm bed. He must be in the teacher's dorms, Izuku thought to himself as he exited the bedroom. Everything ached, but Izuku was used to everything hurting due to intense training, so he easily ignored it. But why did he feel like he was drowning? He entered a kitchen that was connected to the living room. The living room had 3 stockings stuffed with goodies above the fireplace. Izuku also saw a small Christmas tree with unicorn and cat-wrapped presents underneath it. It was Christmas. Izuku's eyes only widened in further panic at the thought. He needed to head home. If he wasn't to his house soon, his mother would only get angrier with him. "You're out. I don't want to see you near this house ever again." Izuku's heart gave a stabbing pain at the memory. That's right. His mother didn't want him anymore. The one person that had been there for him all his life had given up on him. Was it really that surprising, though? He should honestly be more surprised at the fact that she hadn't kicked him out sooner. Maybe no one would ever want him. Maybe he was always meant to be alone with no one to guide him. Maybe that was for the best. "Little listener, good to see that you're up. You gave me and Shouda quite a scare." Midoryia is brought back to his senses by Yamada-sensei's voice. He looked up to see that the voice hero was wearing gray pajama pants and a bright yellow t-shirt that had his hero name on it. Izuku would have smiled at the sight if the circumstances were any different. Yet again, Midoryia wanted to greet his teacher, but his mouth just wouldn't work with him. The memories of last night kept on replaying his mind like a broken record. He didn't know what to do. How could he even live after this? Standing right here, in his teacher's home, that by itself was hard. Breathing was hard. He didn't have a mother anymore. "Ah, problem child. Glad your wounds aren't bothering you," Aizawa said as he walked in, holding Yuri's hand. Yuri's sleepy expression turned into one of excitement when she saw Izuku. She let go of her dad's hand and raced towards Izuku, flinging her arms open. Izuku crouched down only to fall flat on his back as Yuri attacked him in a hug. "Deku Nai, when did you get here?" she asked as she gently got off of Izuku. Midoryia mildly winced as the impact of the hug had bothered some of his injuries. Yuri, why don't you get dressed into that pretty red dress we got you? I'm sure Midoryia would love to see it." Aizawa cut Izuku off, saving him from explaining himself to the kid. Yuri exciters nodded and ran off. Aizawa looked back to Izuku and forced himself to relax. Shouda knew that no matter what, this conversation wasn't going to be pleasant. "Now, problem child, mind explaining why you came to the teacher's dorms late at night on Christmas Eve bleeding out?" Izuku smiled, a coping mechanism he had picked up when things became too much, when he felt like he couldn't express what he was really feeling. His hands, though, were mini earthquakes that wouldn't refuse to stop shaking. Should he tell the truth? What if they didn't believe him? Teachers never tended to believe him, so was it really worth the risk of telling them? "You can't tell them. You've already been a bother. Izuku's wobbly smile widened further. To the heroes, it was heartbreaking to watch as someone they thought as their own tried to build themselves back up alone. You know what? It wasn't really even a big deal. I really shouldn't have come here. I'm sorry for the intrusion. I hope you have a good Christmas, yeah. Midoryia stumbled his way to the door until a hand caught his wrist. Deku instinctually flinched at the sudden contact. He always flinched, especially on Christmas. You should have just bled out in an alley. Hazashi quickly let go of the boy's wrist and looked at him with an emotion in his eyes that Izuku couldn't quite understand. Zuzu. Midoryia slightly relaxed at the nickname. It wasn't used often, but every time it was, Midoryia felt like he was just enveloped into a warm hug. It is a big deal. You could have died. So please, talk to us. Aizawa walked closer to the pair. Zashi's right. Izuku, if you came to us a little later, you would have died. And don't think you're bothering us. We will always be there for you no matter what. Those words seemed impossible to Izuku. Someone to always be there for him. His own mother didn't want him anymore. How could anyone else? Maybe I should have died. It came out more aggressive than Izuku meant it to be, but it was just also confusing when he himself didn't even know what to feel. He didn't know if he was angry or sad, or if he was just done with everything. I mean, my own mother doesn't want me anymore. Not that I could blame her. I'm honestly surprised she lasted this long, you know. He knew that they didn't know, but he had no control of what he was saying. Everything was just tumbling out at uncontrollable speeds. No one has ever truly been there for me. Not my mom, not my dad, not my best friend. Everyone has left. By now, the smile had collapsed and Izuku was crying again. He was so sure he had ran out of tears last night, but apparently not. Izuku collapsed into Hazashi and shouted as they hugged him. Izuku clutched onto their shirts like his life depended on it, and to him, it did. Izuku heard a soft pitter-pattering draw closer to them, and soon it crashed into the hug. We'll never leave you, Suzu. Isn't that right, little unicorn? That's right. I want to save you someday, Deku Nyai, just like you saved me. This only created a new onslaught of tears for the boy as he pulled her into a separate hug. This was all overwhelming, but in a way that it was refreshing and comforting. Izuku smiled a real smile as the tears dried out. This is what we are going to do. Aizawa spoke softly. We are going to talk about what happened, because no matter how much you want to, you can't avoid it. Then after that we are all going to celebrate Christmas together. Yamada and Eri nodded at the new form of plans, while Izuku felt a new crawl of anxiety go up his spine. Celebrate? Christmas? Surely it was no way near what he was used to, and that scared him more than he would like to admit. How was he supposed to act? Was there anything he was supposed to do or say? How do you celebrate Christmas? Because truthfully, Izuku had no idea what it was like. He's only ever heard stories of what it was like. Yeah, Eri said softly. Is there anything we need to do? Bother Heroes smiled. No, not really, Yamada answered. All you have to do is smile and have fun. Smile and have fun. That seemed easier than he expected it to be, but at the same time, not. Izuku softly smiled. He knew everything needed to be talked about and shared. He knew he wasn't okay and needed help. And for the first time in his life, Izuku knew he had people that would always be there for him. No matter how big or small, they would always be there to lend a helping hand. Yuri's face brightened. Hey, Deku Nai, do you like my dress? She said, doing a little twirl in her bright red dress. Izuku sniffed and wiped the remains of his tears. Yes, it's beautiful, Eri. For now, he basks in this moment of feeling truly accepted. He smiles. Izuku used to cut himself. He was 9 when he first heard of it self-harm. That is, he doesn't remember where he exactly saw or heard of it, but the mere idea of it was so intriguing that he couldn't help to not ignore it. He was 9 and was so distraught and empty that he was desperate to feel something other than the constant ache in his chest that threatened to swallow him whole. Izuku remembered back to when the kids at school beat him up, and how he couldn't bring himself to hate it. He enjoyed the feeling of getting bruised up. He enjoyed the feeling of physical pain. Call him a masochist, he doesn't care. Izuku would take physical pain over mental any day. Midoryia thought about what it would be if he was the one to inflict pain on himself, if it would feel any different. It did, in ways that he could never describe. He was 9 when he made his first cut. It was small and shallow, barely deep enough to bleed. It felt euphoric. The drowning in his chest felt a little bit more drier. The heaviness in his head a tad bit more light. Izuku didn't see the problem with self-harm. He didn't know that this wasn't the right way to cope, so he kept on doing it. He told himself that it helped, that it made living through each day just the more bearable. He ignored all the times he felt a deep-rooted self-hate after he had cut, tried to ignore the feeling that this wasn't right, that he needed to ask for help. His mother never found out. Nobody did. It was a secret that he planned to be buried in his grave. Even when he cut bone deep one time and almost at the time he wished bled out, he never asked for help. Izuku didn't think he needed it. He was dealing with his own problems just fine. He didn't need to burden anyone with it. He scarred up his hips and thighs and arms until he had no more room. He cut over the scars, making them darker and more apparent. Izuku forced himself to stop 4 years later, right after he met All Might. By then he knew how bad it was, but it was near impossible to stop. It had helped him for so long, and as sick as it sounds, it had become his only friend. The blade knew all of his deepest, darkest secrets, and it was always there for him in his time of need. He somehow managed to stop, if only to not disappoint All Might. He couldn't bring himself to throw away the blade. It felt cruel to do so. Midoryia kept it, out of reach in a dusty old black box, hopefully to never be opened again. For the first few months he had felt so empty and desolate, but after a while, he slowly got better. Izuku finally had strength to back up his lifelong dream of being a hero, the only thing that kept him here for so long. It was hard to accept the fact that if All Might hadn't offered the quirk, he would have taken Kaken's advice. The veracity of it, though, was undeniable, and Izuku only let himself dwell on it for a morsel. He wouldn't say he was happy. No, that was too far-fetched. What Izuku could say, however, was that he was more hopeful that things could get better. While he trained with All Might, Midoryia found himself thinking about his addiction less and less. Sure, he had his bad days where his skin would scream at him to be torn open, but those days were getting far in between. He began to trust Yagi before he even realized it. The hero was the first person besides his mother, of course, that he trusted wholeheartedly. It was a strange feeling to have faith in someone, but it wasn't an unwelcome one. Everything was looking up, but then the entrance exams came, and so did One for All. The quirk had broken his bones, and not to mention that he almost died. The darker part of him, the one that had hidden itself over the months, had wished that he had died that day. Uraraka saved him, and even if a small part of him wished she hadn't, he would always be grateful that she did. He kept on breaking his bones. At first he convinced himself that it was because he wanted to get a better handle of his quirk, and while that was true, it was only the top layer of his twisted intentions. The feeling of causing pain to himself was all too familiar, and before he knew it, Izuku was craving more. He never opened up that black box, never even looked at it. Midoryia did, however, risk his body over and over to get stronger, to protect and save people. It had taken longer than he would like to admit that part of the reason for sacrificing himself wasn't for the sake of others. Most of it, yes, but not all. It wasn't until he fought Muscular did he realized it. Part of the reason was because he thought he deserved it. Izuku not only felt the undying need to prove to everyone that he was capable of being a hero, but also to himself as well. For so long, he was never good enough, and he was terrified that he never will be. And as idiotic as it sounds, Izuku thought that the only way to prove himself was to destroy his own body over and over again. Once he got better at controlling One for All, he did stop purposefully breaking his bones, but he didn't stop throwing himself into life-threatening situations. The adrenaline he got at being at death's door was as addicting as cutting. He remembered destroying his body over and over and over again only to be created again. He remembered breaking, shattering every bone he had just so he could use his power at its full potential, just so he could save a girl who was far too young to have that much pain in her life. Izuku would do it again. He would do it thousands of times just to assure Iri's safety, even if he still had nightmares of Night Eye's cold, dead eyes and Mirio's blood leaving his body just like his quirk did, even if he shivered every time he had phantom pains at the memory of practically kill himself on loop only to be fixed again. He doesn't matter. He doesn't care how much physical pain he has to endure. Izuku had taught himself to enjoy it, to take it for what it was. Pain meant he was alive. Izuku knew cutting wasn't good, but for the love of God, he couldn't see the problem with this. So why was he in Aizawa's office with an angry he was concerned? But Izuku couldn't see that expression and a cast around his foot. Aizawa had enough. He couldn't let this go on any longer. He should have stopped this a long, long time ago. Shouta should have known something was wrong with his student the day he set eyes on him during the entrance exam. The way the problem child had fallen after he took down the 0-pointer in WoW, wasn't that a surprise? Has that even ever happened before? Had looked so serene. He might even go as far and say that it looked kind of graceful. Shouta marked it as lack of control towards his quirk, which yes, that was true, and his eyes playing tricks on him. No one, much less a kid, should look peaceful falling to a potential death. The hero started to get a sense that something was wrong when the problem child fought Todoroki. The way the kid didn't give a damn that he had all but shattered every bone in his arms was downright terrifying. Not to mention that all of it was just because Midoryia wanted Todoroki to use his left side. Some might have thought it was heartwarming. Aizawa thought it was stupid. Shouta noticed the way how the problem child's pristine handwriting had gotten shaky and messy after the battle. Nor did he miss the way the kid would wince when the weather began to get cold. And then his kid had to risk his life, that damn martyr complex, to save a kid from the training camp. Not to say that the kid wouldn't have died if Midoryia hadn't saved him. But why couldn't the problem child believe that he matters too? Why does he have to risk his life every time something dangerous happens? Why can't Midoryia see how important he is? Aizawa doesn't understand Izuku's almost non-existent confidence, or how he just doesn't seem to care about what happens to him. The kid could destroy a building with just a flick of his finger if he wanted to. Based off of everyone born with overpowered quirks such as his, he should have confidence that was through the roof and be at least somewhat cocky. But he wasn't, and that confused the hell out of Aizawa. Once Shouta heard of his student tearing himself apart for the sake of a girl, he knew he had to put a stop to this. It was a miracle Midoryia hadn't died yet. Aizawa cursed himself for not realizing this sooner, because there was something terribly wrong with his kid, and he would be damned if he didn't fix it. He was going to at least start today. Is going to do it today. But then the kid had to risk himself again during a small training exercise. The result ended in a more than he would ever admit frazzled Aizawa and a broken leg. So here they were, sitting in his office, neither leaving until Shouta got at least some answers. Aizawa was confused with the kid's panicked and guarded eyes. It was something he had never noticed before. But now that he was really thinking about it, Midoryia never showed any indication that he trusted him. That sent a pang through his chest. Aizawa was a teacher. He was someone you were supposed to trust that they would help you. But the problem child never asked for help, did he? Relax, kid. You're not in trouble. I just wanted to talk. This seemed to ease some of the tension in the greenette's shoulders, but his eyes remained shielded. Had Aizawa ever seen them not guarded? Had he even seen the kid relax? The lack of answers only spiked a new sense of concern through him. Okay, Izuku never made contact with him, opting to look down at his lap with fisted hands. If I'm not in trouble, then what do you need to talk about? There are many ways Shouta could go on with this, just as there are 100 more ways this could go wrong. He decided to ask the boy something he isn't even sure Midoryia has ever heard directed specifically at him. Aizawa doesn't half-ass it. He doesn't want a simple answer, because he knows for a fact that there isn't one. With as much care because he cares so much for this kid. But Midoryia, for whatever reason, refuses to see that Aizawa asks, "Are you okay?" Izuku looks so startled by the question that it hurts. The kid snaps his eyes up to meet his, and in those few seconds, Shouta can see a swirl of emotions in his eyes. There's so much loneliness and sorrow that Shouta finds himself having to swallow down his own tears. The look is wiped away and a wave of mistrust and fake happiness takes its place. The boy smiles, but it's more strained than his usual blinding ones. What do you mean? I'm perfectly fine. Aizawa sighs. Why won't the boy trust him? All he wants to do is help and understand. No, you're not, and I'm sorry for not recognizing it sooner. Your self-sacrificial tendencies shouldn't have just been brushed off, so I'm addressing them now. The boy seems so genuinely confused that it would have been laughable if it was a different situation. I don't understand. What's so wrong about that? There's so much unsolved trauma in this boy that Shouta doesn't even know where to start. It's a labyrinth with traps and dead ends. What's wrong about that is that every time something mildly dangerous happens, you feel the need to risk your life. The boy only seemed more confused, so Aizawa continued, "You need to learn that you too matter. That risking your life isn't what makes you a good hero." The boy looks so lost, so broken at the words, but they needed to be said. He couldn't let Midoryia die before he even had the chance to become a hero. I know that what I'm doing to myself isn't going to make me a good hero. And whatever response Aizawa was expecting, it wasn't that one. He was expecting questions or even a refusal. You know, a teacher has never really cared about me, and I know you do. Even if it's just because it's your job. Shouta likes to think that it's hard to surprise him, especially these days. But for a second, the kid had him near flabbergasted. Kid, I don't care about you because it's my job. I care about you because you matter to me. He knows he's going to have to address the fact that the kid admitted that a teacher has never cared for him. But that's for a different time. Izuku stared at him for a long time, searching for something. Aizawa waited for the problem child to find whatever he was looking for. He refused to think that the kid might not find it. Whatever it was, eventually he found it, his eyes looking more open than they ever had around Shouta. It's a long story. I understand if you don't have time. It doesn't make any sense, either. We have all the time in the world, kid. It was sentimental and totally something he would say, but it seemed to be what Midoryia needed to hear. So began the telling of a story about a child who had to bear too much all by himself. Have you ever almost died that wasn't in UA, Deku-kun? Uraraka asked during a sleepover class Mona was holding, and Izuku thinks about all the times that he had almost done it, and the one time he did. It brings an onslaught of memories that will never be forgotten, never truly be erased from his mind. Yes, he answers, and it comes out as a shock to everyone, but at the same time, it doesn't. It's not a secret to how prone Izuku is towards dangerous situations. No, you haven't, Deku. I would have fucking known. Izuku takes a side glance towards Bakugo, who is poorly hiding his shock. Didn't tell you. Didn't tell anyone, I guess. A part of him doesn't want to talk about this, wants to keep the answer simple and move on, but it's too late for that now. What almost killed you, Midoryia? The dual-haired teen asks, his eyes darkening at the thought that his first friend might have died before he even knew he existed. Izuku doesn't want to tell them. No one knows about that night except for himself. He's better now, anyways. It shouldn't matter how he almost died. He's here today. The weight and guilt of it have been crushing him, even if it was almost 3 years ago. That fact that he could have succeeded, well, that was both a terrifying and calming thought. I did. The words have been restrained for so long, and now that they were finally free, Izuku doesn't know what to think. He's not really sure if he's even feeling anything. It shouldn't matter anyways. It was a long time ago, and he's alive. Sometimes the what-ifs keep him up at night. Would anyone be happier? Would his mother be less stressed? Does his life even mean anything? The questions always go unanswered. Well, what do you mean by that, Midabro? Izuku likes Kirishima. He's nice and friendly and is like a new breath of fresh air. The entirety of Class 1A is. He knows that Kirishima hopes that he didn't hear Izuku correctly. It's because he cares for him, and Midoryia is glad for that. He shouldn't care, though. After all, Izuku is happier now. Izuku tilts his head. Maybe if he acted a little bit more innocent and light-hearted, his friends won't be as sad. What do you mean, Kirishima-kun? You know exactly what I said. Why would you ever do that to yourself? Surprisingly, it's Shadow that yells. Izuku has a problem figuring out where exactly his anger is directed out. Midoryia decides it makes the most sense that Todoroki is angry at him for trying the easy way out of life. He still has the empty bottle. He couldn't bring himself to throw it away. There are nights where he holds the bottle tight to his chest to remind himself of how much he's survived. Izuku keeps his face neutral, barricading all of his feelings that are threatening to resurface. He'd really rather not have a panic attack in front of everyone. I wanted to, and maybe that's not the right thing to say, but what else is there? Suicide wasn't meant to be sugar-coated or brushed around. Nothing he could have said would have made it any better. He tried to kill himself because he wanted to, and even though he is better, he still doesn't understand why he couldn't just decide when he wanted to die. It's his life, right? Shouldn't he be able to choose when to end it? Izuku knows he's a hypocrite. He wouldn't want anybody to end their lives, and he knows that he would try his hardest for people to see all that life has to offer, even if he has a hard time seeing it for himself. It's funny how that works, the suicidal kids telling the other suicidal kids not to do it. It really makes you think just how messed up this whole society. If you don't mind me asking, Yayurazu speaks up. Her voice is calm, but something about it sounds like she's speaking to a wild animal. Izuku instantly regrets telling anyone now. People are going to treat him differently. Treat him as if he's going to snap any moment now and try to kill himself again. Only he's already snapped a long time, and he's in the process of mending back the pieces. Alone. He's doing this alone. He can't risk asking for help. Can't risk someone betraying him again. When did you do it? Momo finishes. Izuku doesn't mind the question. Maybe if they knew how long ago it was, it'll calm them down. I tried when I was 12, so about 3 years ago. For some reason, this only makes things worse. He sees how his classmates' faces get paler and their eyes get sadder. I don't get it. Someone with such a powerful quirk isn't supposed to feel that way, let alone at that age. Shinsu speaks up for the first time. He had transferred to Class 1 a few weeks ago in the replacement of Minta. Their relationship was still rocky, and Izuku was still struggling to help Shinsu see that he wants to be friends and isn't trying to use him. Izuku wants to think he has a good answer for that, but he doesn't. He can't tell anyone about OFA, and he isn't ready to tell anyone about his quirkless history either. Every once in a while he has nightmares of his class finding out and turning their backs on him. It horrifies him to the point where he won't sleep for a few days after the nightmare. Didn't stop me from wishing I wouldn't wake up in the morning. And Izuku wonders, would it have? Would being born with a quirk have prevented all of those disastrous thoughts? Stopped his father from leaving and stopped everyone besides his mother hating him? Izuku doesn't like either answer. Guys, seriously, I'm okay now. I no longer think about those things and I want to live now. Everyone relaxes at this, but still seem a little worried. Nobody talks more of it and decides to continue playing games. In the depths of the night, when everyone is sleeping, Izuku thinks. He questions if he's really okay now. He doesn't feel depressed as often as he used to. He certainly doesn't want to die anymore. Or is that just because he has the expectations of other people now? Has a quirk to uphold and cherish. He has problems, but he's working on them. Sure, it's extremely exhausting and lonely, but at least he's trying to get better. On rare nights, he regrets surviving. He thinks to himself, God, I can't even kill myself correctly. On those nights he wants to talk to someone and jump off a roof at the same time. He always opts to stay in the suffocation his room gives him. Izuku doesn't think he's as okay as he thought he was. Izuku is always angry. His rage is always simmering below the surface, always there yet always hidden. He prides himself in keeping his anger under control, only letting fragments of it show when he needs the extra fuel to win against a villain. He lost sight of exactly what or who he was angry at, but he supposes that he's angry with a lot of things. Izuku knows that this isn't healthy, that it could even become dangerous bottling up all of this pent-up hurt and frustration. He understands and acknowledges this, but is he going to do anything about it? Probably not. Some days he wants to. Sometimes Izuku wants to scream his heart out to someone. Oh, how badly Izuku wants to vent, but the only one he could feel truly comfortable with is dead. Until his throat is all scratchy and raw. Until he has no more words to yell. But the only person he could talk to, the one person that believed in him, is gone. Izuku failed him. Just another thing to be angry about. Because no matter how much Izuku tries to tell himself that nothing could have saved the one person he trusted with all his heart, he just can't. And maybe he should talk to a therapist about this. But everyone already thinks he has moved on. He will never move on, so that must mean he's fine, right? Has Izuku ever been fine? Maybe a long, long time ago. So instead of talking, he bottles his vexation up in a tight bottle and only let it leak around the edges when it was needed, or else it might explode. Some days he has no choice to take it out on himself, or else he'll take it out on the people who have hurt him beyond repair. The methods are vast, but none of them are healthy. It could be cutting his hips, pushing himself until he pukes, or not eating for the entirety of the day. With the anger came confusion, because why couldn't he ask for help? Why couldn't he tell someone that he wasn't over Yaga's death, or that his relationship with his mother wasn't as perfect as it seemed to be? That every time he went to visit, he felt like a bird in a cage, always trapped no matter how hard he tried to get out, no matter how many cameras he has to destroy in his room. Even when Izuku was back at the dorms in the safety of his room, no cameras, but he always checked, searching his room over and over again because what if he missed something? He still felt confined. Midoryia always had to remind himself that he could, in fact, breathe. His mind was a cage of its own, so loud yet deathly quiet at the same time. He could never run away from it, and that terrified him. Izuku was going to cut this morning, but he couldn't because he woke up late. He was going to skip breakfast instead. But his classmates had forced him to eat, which meant that he would just have to push himself until he collapsed during training. Hurting himself was his only way to cope with everything. During training he upped the percentage of one for all to the point where his bones ached and his muscles felt like they were being torn apart. It calmed him down from the anger that was threatening to explode. Izuku kept on going and going because he needed to get stronger and he wasn't going fast enough. He destroyed robot after robot until he was nearly blinded by the sheer intensity he was going at. No one noticed, people only thinking that he was pushing himself the extra mile. No one noticed when his legs were shaking like twigs during a windstorm or how his eyes were filled with emotions that could only be labeled as broken. No one worried about him. He was the one person that could take it all. Izuku couldn't though. He needed help, but he wasn't supposed to. No matter how hard or trying things got, they expected him to bounce right back up. When All Might died, he was practically Izuku's father. He felt so empty. He didn't know which one was worse, feeling everything or nothing at once. Everyone came to him after Yaga's death. And for some reason it made Izuku overwhelming angry because he needed to talk to someone too. Why wasn't he allowed to just talk? He knew he was going to break soon had he already broken. But he was pushed to keep on going. He was filled with so much hate and he despised how he was so fake. Nothing about him was real. He had lost himself such a long time ago and it hurts him every time when he thinks about it. Izuku doesn't know who he is anymore. Everything he is built off of lies and expectations. He's made the perfect persona, someone who is kind and funny and never breaks. He is the person who will always be there, unwavering like a candle in the dark. Izuku is chipping away at the edges. He has for a long time now, and it is only now making an appearance. His only protection was now 6 feet under. Every time his mom yells at him, "Those cameras are for your safety. I can't trust you. Izuku, honey, we both know you need me." He loses the last bit of hope he's been clinging on to for so long. When people finally start to notice, it's when Izuku passes out from overworking himself into a fever. They ignore it and cross it off to a one-time deal. They couldn't ignore it for long, because for the first time, Izuku snaps. It's not the person they expected to make him crack, but it's their teacher. It was a simple exercise, one that Midoryia had failed at. No one had judged him, of course except for a certain explosive blonde, but that wasn't out of the ordinary. Izuku himself seemed pretty calm about the mistake, but that soon changed when Aizawa began to speak to him about it. "You made a stupid mistake, one that could have killed you in seconds." Everyone had noticed how Midoryia tensed at the remark. It was an uncommon reaction from the greenette, one that had everyone on edge for an unknown reason. "You're usually a lot more precise. I expected more from you." Aizawa was as blunt and truthful as always, something that the students had come to appreciate. Izuku had a rough day. It was just one of those days where everything felt like the end of the world and nothing could make it better. He was too tired to do any of his usual coping mechanisms. That was bad, because no matter how bad his day was, Izuku could always do one of his self-destructive habits, which meant his training was sloppy. Hearing those words from his sensei made the piece that was holding him together fall. Everyone flinched as his eyes revealed the years of pain and rage that had been hidden for far too long. "You know what, sensei? I wish this was real life, because if what you said was true, I might have finally gotten some rest." No one had heard him this angry before, and unfortunately, the class didn't understand. Midoryia, you are being highly disrespectful towards our sensei. I would advise you to oppose Tenya starts, but is soon cut off by a blank glare and a snarl from his friend, and oh god, Ida thinks. Hadn't he promised Izuku that he would be there for him? Shut up. I don't give a fuck if I'm being disrespectful. I'm so tired of faking all of this bullshit. Izuku all of a sudden looks so much older than he should. So tired of the life he was given. Tired of what? Midoryia. Aizawa speaks, trying to keep the panic hidden. He feels a rush of guilt for failing his student, for not noticing that someone was wrong. I don't even know who I am anymore. I'm built off of lies and expectations, and I somehow lost myself trying to get others to like me. Everyone expects me to always stand right back up, but the thing is, I'm only human. I don't expect you to understand. No one understands. Don't even try to help me, because the only person who could is dead. And if you think you know how to fix me, then you're dead wrong. My own mother thinks she's been helping me for years, but you know what? That's all lies too. Izuku doesn't cry, but everyone expects him to. No one stops him when he runs out of the gym. Some think he's a lost cause. Others think that they will just make it worse. All of them think he'll be back to normal. Their expectations tomorrow. They are right, in a sense. The next morning, Izuku walks into the classroom door with a smile. People either don't notice or ignore how his eyes are a black void and a bright greeting. He doesn't talk to his friends. Izuku doesn't talk to anyone unless he has to. He chooses to distance himself from everyone, too tired of being hurt over and over again. He had shared his last ounce of trust with them, and they had failed. Izuku is always angry, but that's just the surface. Beneath all that hate and vexation is a kid who has been failed far too many times. A kid who only wanted to be accepted for who he is. But most of all, he's a kid who just wanted to be heard. It is what it is. That's what everyone keeps on telling Izuku. And each time he hears it, he becomes more drained than he already was. He felt guilty for feeling so absolutely tired when he knew that others had it a lot worse. People were dying, losing their jobs and loved ones, and all Izuku had to suffer from is the isolation. When Yue was forced to switch to online school, Izuku didn't think it would be that bad. The online schooling wasn't what was so hard about quarantine, though. It was the utter isolation and drenching feeling of loneliness that made Izuku spiral. The hero school thought it would be a good idea for the students to head back to their respected homes instead of staying in the dorms. Izuku had always had a strained relationship with his mother, but it had gotten better ever since receiving his quirk. When he had moved back in, all the progress that Izuku thought they had made towards mending their relationship was destroyed. Inko slowly went back to her, dare he say it, abusive ways, acting like he was some sort of glass doll that could break any moment, and then yelling at him for always stressing her out. She never let him see his friends. He hadn't seen them since the last day before quarantine. Izuku missed so much that it felt like his heart was being ripped out of his chest, and it took hours of begging for her to be okay with training. Midoriya didn't dare say he would be training with All Might and the occasional Kaken. It was like she enjoyed seeing Izuku so isolated. Some days, she would hold him like he was a baby. It made Izuku cringe, but Izuku knew better to move away from her touches. The first and last time he tried to move, he ended up with hours worth of yelling and a bruised cheek. Izuku was trapped inside a glass box, being able to see everything, but never being able to do. Izuku relapsed, and he relapsed hard. He went back into his middle school self. The boy he had tried so hard to get rid of came back full force. Izuku had gotten used to all of the kindness and love he had received from his friends and teachers, and now that he had gotten wiped away from him, he almost felt worse than middle school. Back in junior high, he never knew any difference, but now that he did, it made him crave it. Izuku tried to tell himself that he didn't need any love or affection, and that he certainly didn't deserve it. It's what he used to tell himself a few years back, and it helped, but it also seemed to make him crack even further. Midoriya thought it might work again, but it didn't. It made him feel, God, he didn't know what he was feeling anymore. The confusion of what he was feeling, or maybe he was just numb, only made the hole he dug deeper and harder to get out. Izuku was stuck in a place he didn't even know. The lipophrenia made him want to go crazy. Izuku wanted to run away, but he didn't know where. He needed to do something, but he was captured by these invisible chains that grew stronger every time he tried to crawl out of the hole. Sometimes, Izuku thinks of it as a grave. It brings a comfort to him that he couldn't even begin to explain that he dug himself. He was getting better. Izuku hadn't even thought about the knife in his bathroom in over a year. But here he is, laying in his bed during the ungodly hours of night, watching the blood drip down his wrist. Izuku had promised himself he would never resort to this ever again, especially now since he had his new family that he knew cared about him. But how could he explain all the shit that's inside his head when he doesn't even know himself? His mom wouldn't understand, and even if she did, he would never tell her. Inko was a nurse, which meant she was already really busy and stressed out during these times. The chance that she might brush it off and label it as puberty or that he's over-exaggerating was too terrifying. Izuku doesn't think he would be able to take it if she did that. A few times, when he had considered going deeper into his flesh, he had asked himself, why? Why can't I ask for help just once? He'd been close to calling Yagi when he so desperately wanted the help he knew he needed. But his messed up mind would always supply thoughts on why he should not do that. He never does, and thinks he never will. It's a never-ending game of tug-of-war that has Izuku's hands bleeding and blistered. But he keeps on holding on. Even when he questions what the whole point is, he still refuses to let go of that one strand of hope that things will get better. He just has to be patient. Of course, that's easier said than done, especially since he doesn't know what he's waiting for. Everyone dies in the end. And sometimes, it doesn't matter how hard you fight. This year has shown him that sometimes hope can't fix everything. Hope isn't some superpower that makes you invisible. He becomes more self-destructive as the weeks turn into months of staying in this glass box. The worst part of this is that Izuku knows that what he is doing to himself isn't healthy, but that's the whole point, isn't it? Izuku starts staying up when he has to get up early to attend classes. He starves himself during the day and sometimes binges during the night. He trains until he can't walk and occasionally doesn't dodge when he's sparring with Kaken. Izuku tries to break out of these nasty habits, but it's just so hard. He feels like such a useless failure when he tries to mend himself together, and almost feels proud of himself when he continues on destroying himself. The bags and red-stained t-shirts are obvious, but no one notices. He's always in his room unless he has to meet up with All Might. And when he does meet up with his mentor, he always wears clean sweatshirts and applies makeup to the black holes underneath his eyes. Izuku's good days become farther and farther from each other. It gets extremely more difficult to stay positive and keep a smile on his face. Soon enough, it becomes exhausting to get out of bed. He used to be so excited to return back to school, especially once he figured out that his relationship with his mother was continuing to go downhill, but now all he can think is that he isn't ready. Not yet. He's not better yet. Sometimes Izuku thinks he's invisible, because how can no one tell how bad he's gotten? It seems so obvious that he's falling apart. He keeps on waiting for the day that Toshinori, maybe even Katsuki. Izuku almost rather have him find out than Yagi. He knows that Katsuki and him have their problems, but Izuku knows for a fact that Kaken can be a good listener when he wants to be, might point something out. But he never does. When Izuku calls his friends, he always hopes that one of them will ask him how he's doing or if he's okay. And they do, but something in Izuku's mind tells him that they don't truly want an honest answer, that they're just asking to be nice. It's a setup game Izuku always plays in hopes to win but never does. He needs help, he wants it. But, damn, is Izuku scared. He's so fucking scared of all the outcomes of admitting that he isn't as okay as he pretends to be. The fear makes his heart burn and his brain turn into a mess of overthinking. He swears he's not crazy. Izuku just doesn't know what to do, and everything is just so confusing. He wants to shout and scream at the top of his lungs about how miserable he is. But at the same time, he wants to keep quiet and let his thoughts slowly eat at him until he has no choice but to let go. Izuku stares at his ceiling, wanting to cry, but never being able to. He thinks and thinks and thinks, doing self-destructive thing after another, enjoying the feeling of falling deeper and deeper into his grave, so desperately finding a way to heal himself while simultaneously hurting himself, trying to ask for help while pushing everybody away. He never thought isolation could be this hard, never comprehended how bad he could get, never knew it was possible to feel something that no one had the words to describe, never knew he could feel so alone when there were people he knew would help him. Maybe that was the worst part. Knowing people cared about you but fearing they wouldn't understand. Staring up at his ceiling, Izuku continued to think of all the ways why he didn't deserve help. He swears to himself that maybe he doesn't need it. After all, he is coping. Why does it matter if it's in good or bad way? He won't get help, no matter how much he deserves it. Ending 1. Even now, standing on the highest building he could find, Izuku could still feel the small embers of hope. The hope that someone will care enough to save him. That someone thought he was worth it. Izuku clutched the railings harder. The ice-cold rods of metal sticking to his hands and will no doubt rip pieces of his skin off when he finally lets go. His eyes are tired from the heavy crying he did not even an hour ago, his wrists still dripping with small amounts of blood. I need to talk to you, Izuku. His mother forewarned. Izuku stiffened, but nodded anyways. I saw the bandages around your arms and the blood in your sink. I'm not stupid, I know what you're doing to yourself. Surprisingly, Izuku did not panic. A small part of him even thought that this might be a good thing. Maybe his mom knowing will be the first step to healing. I want you to get better, so I'll be removing you from UA. Don't you think this will be good, Zuko? You won't be as stressed out anymore, and I can finally spend more time with you, just like the good old days. What? Izuku was good at hiding his shaking from his mother, but that shouldn't matter. She should know that this would only make it worse. That the reason he was like this in the first place was because he was away from UA, away from his family. He abruptly stood up, although it wasn't loud. Midoriya had never been so hurt and torn in his whole life, and the fact that the cause was his own mother made it seem as if his limbs were slowly ripping apart. You can't do that. There was so much else he wanted to say, but no words to use. He couldn't even look at her. Inko stood up as well. I can and I will. You have to trust me. This is for the best. Izuku wanted to scream at his mother that this was bullshit, but he knew that it would only make it worse. So instead, he numbly walked to his room and did what he seemed to do best. Hurt himself. Only it wasn't enough. It didn't quell the stabbing of his heart like it usually did. His mind didn't even let him think that calling someone might help. And by the time he did think about that, he was already a mile away from his home without a phone. It was too late. Izuku doesn't know why he was stalling. He should just get it over with already, but something was holding back. He decided to wait one more minute, just in case someone did come to miraculously save him. 10 seconds went by. Then 30 came and went. Izuku slowly let go of the railings at 50 seconds, slightly wincing when some of the skin from the inside of his hand got ripped off. At 60 seconds, he took the final step off of the building, finally coming to the conclusion that no one would ever save him. As cheesy as it sounds, falling was magical. For years now, he's thought about what falling would feel like. The wind nipped at his ears, and even though he was going incredibly fast, Izuku could see everything crystal clear. There were no flashbacks of his life, no regrets, just freedom. He was so close to hitting the ground. Izuku was neither excited nor scared in the end. The whole thing was ethereal. Izuku was ready. He wanted no, that wasn't right. He needed this. But right before he could slam onto the ground, smooth yet rough ribbon wrapped around him. It stopped him just mere inches from the ground, his fingertips scraping against the concrete, ripping a few fingernails off. The pain didn't faze Izuku. It never seemed to. He let himself be pulled up slowly, already registering who was at the top. He had finally convinced himself that his death would be for the best. No one was supposed to save him. That's how it always worked in his mind. Izuku wasn't worth the time to save. So why is he still alive? Izuku doesn't bother to struggle. He's too exhausted. Once he gets pulled up onto the roof, he is engulfed in a hug. He's practically laying in his sensei's lap as he cradles him. Izuku wraps his bloody fingers around the man's shirt and clings onto him as if his life depends on it, and in a way, it does. The sudden adrenaline he had gained from falling slowly left, making his eyes burn with drowsiness. His mind is muddled and his limbs are refusing to move. He doesn't want to talk right now, and even if he did, he doesn't think he'll be able to anyway. So instead he opts for closing his eyes and falling asleep in the embrace of his sensei. It's the first time in months that he's felt this safe. Aizawa carried the boy to his home instead of the kids. Something told him that that would be the last place the kid wanted to be right now. His eyes were red and scratchy from the crying he did a few minutes prior. Shouta tried to not think of what would have happened if he was a second too late. He tried his hardest to not think about how this could have gone. He did anyway, and damn it, he was so frustrated. How could this his kid want to jump? What would drive the usually happy ray of sunshine to kill himself? Was all of that charisma and happiness fake? An act of lying to what he was really feeling? No, that couldn't be it. Just a few months ago, the kid's eyes were shining with a happiness that would be impossible to fake. A few months can change a lot. And boy have things changed. Online school has been difficult for students and teachers alike, but Izuku should have known that he would always be there for him, so why hadn't he known? Aizawa gently lays Izuku on the guest bed after taking care of his arms and goes to the kitchen. There's no way he's going to get any sleep and pours a mug full of coffee. It's roughly 4 in the morning, meaning Hisashi won't be up for another hour and Eri for at least another 3. He takes this time to himself to think about what had happened and what he could do to help. But there was one question that kept on coming up. Why? Good morning, Sho. How is patrol? Yamada asks as he begins to make some tea. Aizawa waits for him to sit down before saying anything. As usual, Shouta is blunt. Problem child tried to kill himself. He's sleeping in the guest room right now. It's eerily quiet for a few minutes before the announcement finally registers for Yamada. Zuzu tried to what? Azashi's face is pale, and Aizawa is worried he might pass out. Before either of them can say anything else, footsteps sounded down the hallway. Midoriya soon came into view with the dullest eyes Hisashi and Shouta have ever seen on him. Good morning, little listener. Yamada speaks softly, like a song through the wind. How did you sleep? Izuku seems to contemplate for a bit before speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. Fine. Thank you for asking. What about you, Yamada-sensei? Shouta smiles. Even with everything that happened, the Greenette still takes everybody into account. I slept wonderfully. And please, just call me Hisashi, little listener. Izuku sleepily nods. Okay, Yama Hisashi. His eyes shift to Shouta's before quickly lowering to the ground. I'm sorry I caused you so much trouble. You shouldn't have had to save me. Aizawa frowns before signaling Midoriya come closer. Come on kid, look at me. When Izuku does, Shouta continues. Don't ever say sorry for what happened, okay? You'll have to take your feelings into account, too. Sometimes heroes have to put themselves first in order to save. Got it. Izuku lets out a choke sob before barreling into Aizawa's chest. The hero doesn't think twice before returning the hug. And soon enough, Hisashi joins in. Thank you so much. You saved me. Aizawa and Yamada tighten their hold around the teen who had to endure far too much far too soon. I'll do it again. Over and over until you see that you are worth saving. Thank you. Ending 2. Warning, suicide and romanticization of death. Izuku relished in the icy wind that nipped his ears. The stinging pain made him feel alive for the first time in a while. How fitting, he thinks, to feel the most alive right when you're about to die. It almost made him rethink his upcoming decision. Almost. Midoryia stares off into the beautiful night view of Musutafu, the lights from down below scaring off all of the stars into hiding. Such a shame. Izuku would have loved to see the magnificent star-filled sky one more time. Apparently life wouldn't even fulfill that want for him, even in his final moments. Izuku looked down and faintly saw the moving blurs of people with their own individual lives, thoughts, and emotions were continuing on. He hoped that those moving blobs of people were all doing okay. He hoped none of them thought about what he did when the door shut, caving them in with their own mind. It'd be useless still attending you. No one wants a hero that hates themselves, so that's why I'm pulling you out. He disperses the memory quickly. He does not want his last thoughts to be of that. Izuku clenches his fists so tightly that his hands start bleeding. Even so, he digs deeper, collecting more blood from his damaged hands. For the first time since this whole relapse started, was it even a relapse? Or did he just learn to push his feelings down his throat until he finally had to spit them all out? Izuku didn't want to be saved. After so long, he had opted that he didn't need saving. He had the perfect, near-flawless solution that he could solve without anybody's help. The suggestion had come across his mind far too many times to be able to count. He has always carried hope that he could make things better. That with time, everything can get better. And it can, just not in the way he used to think it was. Being saved will only deny the inevitable. It'll give him hope and then leave him more broken than he already was when it gets crushed. Izuku had waited long enough. It was time. A numb smile spread onto his face as he climbed off the small wall that separated him from the edge of the high roof. Falling wasn't like he had imagined it to be. Izuku had fantasized of the fall to be something akin to magical, but it wasn't. If at all, it felt sort of painful. He was sure that the wind would cut his cheek by how fast it whizzed by. His heart was beating so fast in his chest from the infinite adrenaline that it made his chest hurt. Izuku thought it would be like slow motion, being able to see with such clarity and beauty, but it wasn't. Everything was a blur and time felt like nothing. He didn't know if it had been hours or mere seconds from when he jumped. He supposed it didn't matter, time wouldn't change the ending. Not in this story. By the time he had met with the ground, the monotone smile had changed into one that resembled warmth and peace. All the pain that he had felt for so long was wiped clean in seconds. An internal slumber awaits him as he lets out his last breath of air. Everybody can be saved, but Izuku is not everybody. The power had become too much. It was too painful. He didn't want to die. Not like this. So he decided to pass it on. He knew that he was evil in doing so, sealing one's death when they could have stopped it. But the voices inside his head were screaming, and some hopeful part of him hoped that this boy could handle it. Yagi just wanted to make himself feel better. He didn't want to think that this boy will die a horrible, pain-ridden death. Or he might even go crazy when the voices become too much. Giving his quirk to the boy was the most weightlifting yet heavy thing he has ever had to do. But you had to understand his point of view. No one wanted that kind of future, that kind of death. He did what anyone else would do, and gave it to someone else. Toshinori wasn't planning on getting attached to the kid, but he did. Izuku soon became like the son he never had. He hated it because it only made the guilt rattle his bones even more. He watched young Midoryia break bone after bone just to gain control over a quirk that would soon devour him whole. He wondered if Izuku even cared about himself, pondered if the teen even feared death. Yagi hoped he didn't. It might make accepting his fate easier to digest. He knew that Midoryia wouldn't pass on the quirk. He wasn't a coward like Tadahori was. His boy would put his life in danger just to see others smile. How dare you? The voice of Nana haunted him during the night when he had no dreams. Just the voices. He thought the voices would have stopped. He was wrong. Sometimes he had nightmares of the quirk finally destroying young Midoryia. Flashes of coughed-up blood and seizures haunted him every day. But Midoryia held on without knowing. He continued to save and learn as his quirk became progressively more powerful and complex. He continued to strengthen in ways Yagi never thought was possible. The former hero began to believe that Izuku might have the capability of withstanding one for all. Something that Toshinori didn't have. He had started to calm down after that belief, the guilt less weighing as time passed on. It all got crushed when he received a phone call at 2 a.m. It was from his boy. He was almost in his second year and Toshinori couldn't have been prouder. Every day he told Izuku that, afraid that there may be a day where he couldn't. Why Yagi-san? It had hurt so much. He knew what young Midoryia was talking about, but he refused to acknowledge it. What does, my boy? A choked sob sounded from the other line. The cry was almost iniquitous coming from the boy. It was common occurrence that Izuku cried, but it was nothing akin to the agony that had woven through his voice. And my quirk, it's tearing me apart, All Might. It was the first time young Midoryia had called one for all his quirk. The fact made the cracks in Yaga's heart deepen further. He had failed his boy, hadn't he? Just a few days ago, the teen had shown no signs of this ever happening. He hadn't even seen a hint of exhaustion or discomfort during his one-on-one training with him. Unless, Midoryia, my boy, how long has this been going on? Yagi clenched his phone so hard that he absently thought he might break it. Izuku sucks a huge gulp of air into his lungs as if he hadn't gotten any in ages. A few months ago, the users told me what would happen. I didn't want you to feel guilty. Why wasn't Izuku blaming him? Yagi was culpable for all of this. He should have been the one who died with OFA, not this young man who had barely even started life. We didn't want him to know that his idol was the one that brought forth his downfall. It would be too cruel. Nana gravely spoke, a twinge of spite and disgust in her voice. Just hang on, Izuku. We'll get you help. Where are you now? Toshinori didn't even bother to get dressed as he exited his house, car keys in the other hand. Midoryia laughs, as if what Yagi just said was truly funny. Soon the laughs turned into wet coughs, no doubt spewing red blood. Yagi-san, I'm not going to survive this. We both know it. The quirk has been tearing me up from the inside for months. I knew this day was coming. Sooner or later, he's gasping for air at this point, trying to steal as much as he can before re-entering another savage coughing fit. Something suddenly clicks into place for All Might. All of his sacrificial behaviors, the need to save as many people he could, even when he was only in his first year, never putting his life first. Yagi falls onto the cement ground right next to his car. His kid had known that this was going to happen. This just made the kid care about his life less. Tears begin to fall seamlessly from his cheeks. He has to bite multiple sobs back. He couldn't let Midoryia hear him. Yagi had to be strong for him. After all, Izuku had been strong for so long. He deserved a break. You know what, All Might? The only thing Yagi can do is offer a pathetic hum. I thought dying would be scary, but it's not. Actually, it's kind of peaceful in its own violent sort of way. No, please don't go. The voices are reassuring. Did you know that once I die, I'll be with them? Nana reminds me a lot of my mother. You can't leave. You're too important to me. Please, just hold on a little longer, my boy. I need you to hold on. Izuku begins to sob once again, his voice holding tremors in it. I'm so tired, Yagi-san. I lied about not being afraid. I don't want to die. I should have been the one in this position. I want to live. I want to graduate and become a hero that saves people with a smile. I want to go out with my friends more. I want to spend more time with you. Yagi tries to smile to stop the tears. You have to stop. You brought this upon yourself. I want to spend more time with you, too. You're a son to me, Izuku. Toshinori tries not to think about how Izuku's breathing becomes smaller and smaller. And you're like a father to me. Why did it have to be like this? A bright, broken smile stretches across his face. It's okay, my boy. You can rest now. You don't have to fight anymore. Saying this had broken something inside of Yagi that he'll never get back. That's right. He's just a child. Thank you. Yagi, the former hero, hears the phone fall from the boy's hands. And just like that, everything is over. Young Midoryia. Izuku, please. I know I said it was okay, but please still be alive. Yagi knows he isn't. He knows that Toshinori had just ended a life far before it began. The teen had just gotten a taste of happiness and Toshinori had just ripped it away with no mercy. Toshinori dripped at his chest and struggled to breathe. Heartbroken sobs finally escaped from his throat as he suffocated from sadness. It should have been me, but it wasn't. Sometimes, Izuku wanted to be someone else. It was rare, but some days Izuku wanted to be an entirely different person. He wanted completely different clothes, different hair, different hobbies, different everything. He wanted to run away to a place that didn't exist, a place where he could be no one and someone all at once. On these days, Izuku would look at what he was wearing and absolutely hate it. He would want to rip off his clothes and tear at his skin until it was entirely new. He wanted to cut his hair and change the color. He needed to look different, something that isn't him. Izuku wanted everything about him to not be, even if it was only for a second. He wanted to change the way he acted. Midoryia wanted to be mischievous and rude, and everything that was the exact opposite of him. All of this made an unbearable amount of self-hate to crash over him. He could never move when his thoughts went in a downward course of you need to change. You aren't you need to be someone else. For 1 second and 1 second only. He doesn't want to be a hero in training. He wanted different expectations or none at all. It made everything he had ever done seem pointless. These little attacks made every single breath he's fought for seem utterly useless. Izuku wanted to tear out his hair and observe his blood caress down his face. Even though his mind shouted at him to look at the mirror and observe how disgusting he was, he couldn't. He didn't need any more reasons to hate himself. Oh, did Izuku despise himself? Even when he wasn't in one of these episodes, the self-disgust always clenched at his heart even during his happiness of moments. He wanted to shut off the entire world until he found a part of himself that he could love and be at the same time. But even if he had somehow managed to shut off the entire world, he would never be able to hush the mantra of thoughts that lay in every corner of his mind. They were the whispers that he didn't want to have. He didn't want them to claim him as theirs, albeit it was too late for that. Izuku had already sunken into the black hole that was himself. Midoriya was always nomadic, never knowing where to go. He searched and searched to find the reason as to why people even cared about him, but he never did. How could his friends love him when there was nothing for them to love? They always reminded Izuku how much they cared about him even through the simplest of things. It caused an unknown stress to hide itself within his walls, and he loathed that he didn't know why. Was there something he was missing? Something that was actually worth loving? It was invisible to him, but he needed to find it so he wouldn't feel like this anymore. He needed a reason to stay him and not turn into an invisible entity that had no reason to stay. He inspected everything about himself and only turned up with more things to hate. Izuku was claustrophobic in an open field. Everything would be so much more better if he could just find something. Izuku never could. He continued to fall deeper and deeper into a sea of confusion and darkness, not bothering to kick his way up to the surface. It was impossible to change when he didn't even know what he had to change to feel like he was him without being him. He kept on breathing even when his lungs were on fire from the sobs that escaped his mouth in the dark of his room. Izuku continued to fight even when his own skin felt foreign and poisonous. Izuku would rather stab himself repetitively than live like this for the rest of his life. But even through all of the burning of lungs and clenches of hearts, he still found it in himself to love the people who were in his life except him. Never him. He wasn't a part of his life. The people he adored made the punched mirrors and bleeding knuckled worth it, even if he didn't know why. Izuku knew he was cared for, and that one reason was why he was still fighting this seamlessly endless battle between the clashing sea that was his mind and himself. Midoriya, no matter how much air he lost, would fight until his very last breath, because he was loved even when he couldn't love himself. Izuku knew he would see him again. It was inevitable. He knew this, yet he refused to acknowledge it. He pushed it to the deepest corner of his brain for it to rot, only worrying about it when it came crawling through his nightmares as if it had been starved from his lack of acknowledgement. His terrors always clung to him no matter how hard he tried to shake them off. Izuku scratched at his skin, raking his nails through his arms until blood was drawn. He hoped that the fear would escape through his blood. A small sacrifice to make his mind ease for at least once. It never did. No matter how many times he tried. He knew it would happen. Someday, somewhere he would see the man again. But why did it have to be here? Why did it have to be now? Izuku wasn't ready. He doesn't think he ever will be. Midoriya, you have a visitor. Aizawa's gruff voice sounds through the common room. Everyone glances at him, making Izuku curl up on himself at the sudden attention. Midoriya tries to stop his hands from shaking as he follows his teacher to the entrance of UA, where they're going to be meeting. A cold sweat is beginning to form, and the familiar buzz of anxiety is making his heart skip beats. He's scared. So scared. Even so, he focuses on putting one foot in front of another, never once looking up from the ground. He's your father. His teacher questions. Izuku wants to deny it. That man is not his father and never will be. His eyes harden in protection as he stands up straighter and looks straight ahead. He begins to scratch at one arm, trying to ground himself. Something like that. Izuku manages to spit out, concealing his disgust and trepidation to the best of his ability. It must have not been good enough, because Aizawa's face morphs into confusion and worry. The infinite walk ended all too soon as they made it to the entrance. Izuku refrains from flinching as he sees Hisashi. He needs to get this over with and tell that bastard of a man the words that he's refrained for so long. Can you stay here? I need to speak to him alone, please. Aizawa silently agreed and stopped walking. Izuku knew he would be watching from a distance, and with that new blanket of safeness came a new wave of resolve. He sees the black-haired man smile gingerly, his ash-gray eyes twinkling with plastered kindness. Midoriya stops not too far away from him, but far enough to where he could retreat without any mishaps. His father opens his arms widely. Izuku thinks it might be for a hug that they both know he won't be getting. The arms look like a cage that would trap him forever if he accepts the invitation. Midoriya doesn't move a centimeter, so Hisashi irately drops his hands, forming a plastic smile that makes Izuku cringe. So in return, Izuku sends an equally fake smile back right at him. Izuku, son, the teenager is forced to swallow his words that burn at his throat. Not yet. He has to wait. It's been so long since I've last seen you. You have a quirk now. Did those fun little games we played when you were a kid finally come of use? Izuku bites the inside of his cheek so hard that it starts to bleed. He forces himself to swallow it as he looks at the monster right in the eyes. Don't worry, Zuku. All of this will be worth it someday. You just have to. See, Zuko, all you had to do was trust me. No, he prides himself in his unwavering voice, head held high, ready to tell him the words that have burned him for so long. You're wrong. What you did was wrong. I shouldn't have trusted you back then. You didn't give me a quirk. You gave me scars and trauma. His smile drops, as do the warmth in his eyes. What I did made you stronger, Izuku. Son, don't call me son. Izuku infuriates. I am not your son. You have no right to call me that, Hisashi. Midoriya takes a step back once he sees the man's throat turn molten red. The step is all he can do to try to get away. Terror overtakes him and the mountains of memories make him freeze. The phantom pains of burning flesh make his breath hitch. Izuku swears he can smell the scent of burning flesh. Nothing happens, though. He never got burned. Midoriya Hisashi, you are under arrest. Izuku's blurred vision comes back into focus at the sound of his teacher's voice. He sees Hisashi tied up in Aizawa's capture weapon, choking on his own smoke as he struggles to free himself. It isn't until Hisashi is behind bars a few hours later that Midoriya begins to full process what happened. He's sitting next to Shouta outside of the dorms when it becomes hard to breathe. The bricks that have been constantly on his chest have finally been lifted. But why is he struggling to gather air? He's been so accustomed to the ever-lying fear that now that it's gone, he doesn't know what to do now. Izuku loathes to admit it, but the fear had become a part of him. He's built so many rules of survival off of it, but now he doesn't have to think about it. For so long, his fear had been his only protection. A sob that he hadn't known was forming escaped his mouth. He ran a hand through his hair to give himself something to feel, but it wasn't calming him down. Why was he so terrified? He felt so suffocated, but shouldn't he be able to breathe freely for the first time in years? Problem child. The tears wouldn't stop. They traveled endlessly. His sobs broken and ugly. He couldn't see, he couldn't breathe, he couldn't think. Kid, don't you get it, Zuzu? You deserve to be burned. Every scar I give you is a blessing. Did he really deserve all of that torment? Would it have been better if he was born with a quirk? Things would have been different. Of course they would have been. Would it have been better if he wasn't born at all? Izuku. Aizawa's rough voice was laced with concern. Finally breaking through, Izuku looks up. He's exhausted from these past few hours. All he wants to do now is crawl into his bed and let the comfort of sleep envelope him whole. Midoriya doesn't break eye contact, no matter how much he wants to. Look at me when I'm talking to you, son. Why yes, sensei. He hopes he isn't in any trouble. He probably is. Aizawa is going to expel him because who wants to teach a broken kid? Oh God, what is he going to do now? He's going to go back to being the worthless, useless. I'm not going to expel you. All I want is for you to feel safe. And shouldn't that be easy? He's in one of the most protected places in Japan. He should feel safe, but he doesn't. Izuku doesn't even remember what the feeling of real secureness is like. How? The question makes his teacher frown for reasons he doesn't know. You have to trust me. It was soft and sincere, but that didn't make it any easier to accept. Izuku, trusting an adult. How could he do that when every adult he's ever trusted has failed him one way or another? To Izuku, the whole idea of trusting an adult is ludicrous. Aizawa seems to see the skeptical look on his face because he continues. I'll make sure you never feel the fear that man gave to you ever again. You are an amazing person, Midoriya. You deserve to feel safe and loved without fearing for any repercussions. That's all Midoriya has ever wanted, but shouldn't that be impossible? He doesn't deserve it. Izuku told himself this over and over again when he imagined a reality when he did have those things. It made it easier to accept. I don't deserve it. As soon as those words fall from his lips, Shouta firmly shakes his head. No, you do. If you can't trust me right now, that's fine. Could you just let me teach you that you are deserving? That you are worth it? Midoriya tries to scramble for all of the terrible outcomes that could follow his acceptance of his offer, but he can't. Maybe it's because he's too worn out, or maybe there just isn't any. Either way, Izuku can't bring himself to care. With a nod of his head, Izuku agrees. Okay, I'll let you do that. It's not until later at night that he realizes that was the first time in a long time he allowed himself to show trust towards an adult. It's also the first time he can breathe without feeling like he's drowning. Izuku always gave and never received. He had never really thought about it that much before. Perhaps it was because it wasn't worth it. Ever since he could remember, Izuku was always selfless, giving his pencils when he knew they wouldn't be returned, and if they were, it wouldn't be in the condition they once were. Helping other kids who had fallen only to eat dirt in return. Covering up cuts and bruises from his mom so he wouldn't burden her any further than he already was. Helping, even in the smallest of ways, made Izuku happy. Or at least, he thought it did. He never thought giving when his pockets were empty would come back to bite him. But it did. It did when he refused to ask for help, because he was the helper, not the helped. He never knew you could be both. It hurt him when he gave even though he was running on empty. It punched against his heart when he loved and loved when no one loved him back. Even when it hurt like hell, he kept on providing because it was a part of him. It was woven into his character. and he doesn't think he'll ever be able to rip it out. Izuku couldn't even stop himself when started to destroy his body over and over again. He could finally become a hero, which meant he had to be stronger. He never asked for help, and he certainly couldn't do it now. Not when that would only waste precious time to become the person he needs to be. The current him isn't enough, but he's so empty. All his life, he gave without receiving. Now after years of doing that, Izuku was terrified he didn't have anything left in him. For once, he wanted to feel like he was worth something. Izuku was reading his assigned book he had to read for literature in the common room. He was sleep-deprived and shaking with more anxiety than he could contain in his body. He was all caught up on his homework, ahead, even. The book wasn't due until next week and he was already on the last chapter. Midoriya felt so behind on everything. He had years' worth of experience to catch up with his quirk, and he knew he was a danger to himself with how reckless he could be. His mind wandered off to Sir Night-Eye. No matter what Izuku did during the raid, someone still died. He couldn't help but think that if Mirio had OFA, none of those casualties would have happened. He was so damn useless. Even tearing himself apart and enduring the excruciating pain it brought did almost nothing. Izuku still has phantom pains from that and all of his other failures. He knows he deserves it. But he was nothing without his sacrifices. His pain saved people. To Izuku, that was pure facts, an invisible code that he had reread every day when he wanted to stop giving. In order to save and make people happy, Izuku needed to throw away his time, his sleep, his happiness. It was always like this, and Midoriya forced himself to normalize it, to think of it as another part of his day that will forever be the same. After years, he still found it hard to accept it. Deku Nai, Dori's cheerful voice sounded through his ears, breaking the trail of thoughts that shouldn't mean anything they do. Why does he care so much? The teen looked up to see Eri running towards him with Aizawa not too far behind. Izuku's face broke out into a smile as he got off of the couch and crouched down with his arms spread out in front of him divided by Eri-chan. Midoriya greeted Eri as she flew herself into his arms, causing both to crash onto the ground. He hugged her tight before sitting up and letting her go. She gave him a big, bright smile that almost made Izuku squint. His hands were still shaking. He couldn't tell if it was from the pain or his anxiety that had both been especially bad today. Probably both. Once they stood up, Izuku made sure to tuck them behind his back so his teacher wouldn't notice. Dad said I could hang out with you today. Isn't that great? Eri exclaims as she throws her hands up in the air in excess excitement. Only if I tag along. Cuts and Shouta as he tried to hide the upwards twitch of his cheeks. Midoriya is tired today. His thoughts going 100 miles a minute, body aching to an almost unbearable level, and mentally exhausted from the burnout that has been developing for years now. Even though all he wants to do is finish his book and go to sleep for a few hours or a few years, Izuku can't bring himself to say no. He loves Eri and is willing to do anything to make her happy. He can catch up on his sleep some other time. That is great. Do you have anything you had in mind that we could do? Eri excitedly nods and turns to look at Aizawa. You said we could go to that new bakery, right? Can we please do that? Shouta sighs before nodding. He looks at Izuku and asks, are you ready to go now, or do you have to get anything? I'm ready to go now. Aizawa got permission to leave the campus and then they were off. Silence had overtaken them peacefully as Eri excitedly looked around, gripping Izuku's aching hand. Deku Nai, why are your hands shaking? Eri questioned. Izuku had gotten so used to the tremors that he forgot they were even happening. Eri must have felt it while holding hands with him. The teen purposefully doesn't look in the direction of his teacher. Izuku doesn't want to see the questioning look he knows his teacher has in his eyes. Midoriya chooses to keep it simple, not wanting to talk about the effects of destroying himself or his anxiety at the moment. It's just something that happens sometimes. I'm sorry, is it bothering you? He wouldn't be surprised if it is. All he seems to do is bother and burden and annoy people. However, Eri quickly shakes her head. No, it's not. I was just curious. Midoriya hoped that would be the end of the discussion, but of course Aizawa-kun as always had to question it. And why are they shaking? Problem child. Izuku hates and loves that nickname. He loves the fondness that comes along with it, but sometimes that's easy to brush over. It's not like the underground hero is wrong, because he's not. Izuku does cause trouble. Was all that trouble worth it? Midoriya often questions. He likes to think that yes, most of the time it is worth it. Ooh, I guess that's what I get, hey. Isn't it the bakery? Maybe the distraction will help him from not having a conversation he does not want to have. Eri bounces up and down excitedly before rushing towards the entrance. Izuku goes after her, entering it bakering right after her. The inside is cute and comfy with rows of delicious pastries and drinks people could pick from. He knew exactly what Eri was going to get when his eye set upon a beautiful-looking candy apple with a detailed caramel swirl design. Are you going to get the candy apple, Eri-chan? Yup. I doubt it'll be as good as yours, though. Midoriya's heart swelled at the simple compliment. He never got much compliments before UA, if any at all. He was still getting used to the affection he would receive sometimes. What about you, Deku Nai? I was thinking about the dorayaki with a matcha green latte. Sensei, what are you getting? Izuku asked once Shout walked next to them. I'm just going to get a cassella with a cup of espresso. The request made Izuku let out a giggle before walking up to the counter where a familiar-looking white-haired girl stood. Hello, can I get a Midoryia? Is that really you? Now he remembered. It was Mitsuri Yukino, a girl he went to middle school with. Not one of his main bullies, but still someone he never wanted to see again. Izuku refused the urge to shrink away. He wasn't that person anymore, he was. A part of him will always be. Ah, Mitsuri-san, so nice to see you again. Midoriya blatantly ignored how her face twisted into one of disgust. Could I have one cassella, one candy apple, and one dorayaki? Oh, and a matcha green latte and a cup of espresso, please. Mitsuri rolled her eyes. Yeah, whatever. That'll be 2,702.37 yen. Right as he was about to pull out the money, Shouta put a hand on his shoulder. Let me pay, kid. Not taking no for an answer. Still, Izuku tried. Aizawa had done so much for him. He needed to repay the favor whenever he got the chance. But, I said no, Midoriya. I was the one to drag you out here in the first place. Before Izuku could argue further, he put the money on the counter. Mitsuri didn't even try to smile as she took the money and began to gather their orders. Izuku still felt guilty about not paying, but he couldn't stop the small smile as he saw Eri slightly drooling at the thought of her candy apple. They all went to take seats at a small table to wait for their desserts. Your hands are still shaking, problem child. How often do they do that? Midoriya nervously scratched the back of his neck anxiously. I guess it depends on the day, or how I'm feeling. On the day. What does that mean, Deku Nai? God, he was going to have to explain this, wasn't he? He hadn't even told Recovery Girl about his phantom pains. He bothered her enough already. Well, sometimes they shake more when it gets colder. Sometimes I just have so. Expands his hands out to exaggerate. Much energy that I can't contain at all. That was a good way to explain he had anxiety without actually admitting it to anyone. He doubted she would even know what it was anyways. Most times they ache. Ache? Eri asks, tilting her head. He sees Aizawa narrow his eyes at him and damn it, he must have said that out loud. Yeah, but don't worry. It's worth it. Problem child. Your pain should never be worth it. Izuku doesn't get that. His pain has always been worth it in somebody's eyes. His pain meant that he helped someone. His pain was all he knew. He was about to question it. But Miss Drui had chosen that to be a good time to show up with their food and drinks. She set them down at the table, not even trying to hide her glare towards Izuku. Midoriya didn't really care. And he made sure to smile politely at her because at least she didn't refuse their order. It was nice seeing you again, Midoriya. Yukino pauses for a moment before smiling poisonously. I honestly didn't think I'd ever see you again. She walks off before anything else can be said. Izuku knew exactly what she meant by that, and he refused to address it. Aizawa takes a sip of his espresso and suspiciously looks at Izuku. She seems friendly. It was hard not to snort at the clear sarcasm. An old friend of yours. This time Izuku couldn't hold back the small laugh that escaped his mouth. Yeah, right. Like he had any friends back in middle school. He'd be lying if he said he had any acquaintances, either. No, not exactly. Just someone I had classes with. Izuku smiled fondly at Eri, who was happily eating her candy apple. Thank you, by the way, for paying. Whatever, kid. So what was middle school like for you? I imagine you would have been pretty popular. Now it was Izuku's turn to narrow his eyes at the hero. He didn't like talking about his middle school days, especially when he couldn't explain why he didn't like them when the whole reason was because he was quirkless. You could probably say I was the opposite of popular. Although my middle school wasn't exactly the best. The hero in training laughed awkwardly. In his opinion, that was severely sugarcoating it. Aldera was a piece of sheet school with fucked-up opinions. He cupped his hands around the warm mug, trying to ease his torn hands. A spike of pain went up his arms, making his hands spasm for a second. Izuku put great focus into gripping his mug even harder, trying not to let that happen again. Why are you so okay with breaking your bones? Yeah, doesn't it hurt? Eri, who's gone through horrible, terrible things yet can still be so innocent. He hopes that innocence can last for a lot longer than his did. Izuku knows that his morals aren't healthy nor normal. He can't explain that the only way he feels like somebody is if he gives everything he has away. But he can't change the fact that his pain helped people. Hell, his pain used to help him. So sure, it's not exactly healthy, but as long as he's the only one to bear consequences, it's sure to be okay, right? Midoriya tilts his head, because this is when he starts to get truly confused. He misses the worry that swims in his teacher's eyes at the small movement. I'm okay with it because he loved the pain. After years and years from suffering through mental and physical pain, you learn to adapt. Izuku taught himself that pain makes you stronger. It was one of the few things that made him feel alive. It makes me stronger. He doesn't think he meant to say that out loud. Or maybe he did. Either way, he doesn't think it really matters. They all get up and start walking back to UA. Aizawa looked as if he's contemplating something. The look always gives Midoriya the creeps since he never knew what the other man was thinking. How was your apple, Iri-chan? The girl tightly grips Izuku's hand and puts on her cutest thinking expression. Izuku has to hold in his squeal at how adorable Iri is. It was delicious. I like yours better though. Do you think you can make them again someday? Of course. I'll try to make them next week. Okay. Iri's face lights up in excitement and her eyes sparkle diamonds before going back to her contemplating look. Hey Deku Nai, what's a piggyback ride? The question was completely random and out of nowhere, but it took Izuku's mind off of his constantly racing thoughts. I'll show you. He bent down to a crouch and put his arms behind him. Hop onto my back. Iri's eyes widened in realization as she shyly got onto his back, making sure she wouldn't fall. Izuku slowly stands up and begins to run towards the now visible campus. He distinctly hears Shouter running to catch up with him. Iri laughs happily and squeals in pure delight. Can you go faster, Deku Nai? In response, Izuku speeds up, loving how this is making Iri so happy. His laughs mix with hers as he runs to the top of the hill where the hero school stands. He's hardly out of breath by time they make it to UA. He gently sits her onto the ground just as Aizawa catches up with them. A small smile gracing the sleep-deprived teacher. Soon enough they are back in the dorms. The girls notice Iri and try to whisk her away into one of their sleepovers. The young girl is reluctant since she's never had a sleepover before and is still a little shy around the other students of Class 1A. Midoriya pets her head fondly. You should go. I promise you'll have fun with them. If you don't, just remember you can always come to me. Yup, if you get uncomfortable, we'll call Midoriya right over. Mina reassures. Iri decidedly nods her head, but before she walks off with the women of 1A, she tackles Deku in a hug. I love you, Deku Nai. The short sentence makes his eyes water in happiness. He doesn't remember the last time someone had told him that they loved him. He tries to swim through his memories, but he can't even recall the last time his own mother had said those words to him. It gives him a warmth he never knew he had lost. Izuku hugs her tight before letting her go, determined to not let the tears spill. He gives Iri the brightest smile he can muster. I love you too. He continues to smile until Iri and the other students are gone from the common room. He quickly wipes his eyes and jumps when a hand lands itself on his shoulder. People care about you, problem child. You're not alone. Not anymore. Izuku delightfully laughs. For the first time in far too long, Izuku believes an adult. Thank you, sensei. Midoriya doesn't think he'll ever be able to repay the man for everything he's done, but for now, this is enough. Right now, in this moment, he feels as if he's enough. You're a child. Embrace it. It gets worse when you become an adult. You have it easy right now. Wait until you grow up. You're a child. You have it easy. Be glad you're not an adult. Stop complaining. He gets it. Izuku understands it. He is a child, therefore he shouldn't be complaining since adults have it worse. He is a child, which means his life is easy. But it isn't. It hasn't been since he was 4. And he's so tired of being called a child when he's gone through enough pain to last 2 lifetimes. He can't be a child anymore. Not after the things he's gone through. Not when he has the weight of responsibilities most people never have. Izuku can't afford the luxury of being a kid anymore. It was manageable at first. He could deal with skipping the normal teenage things. Even if his mind drifted off to what could have been if he had been born with a quirk, he'd probably have memories of love and laughter and making stupid decisions. Not pictures ingrained into his mind and skin of red spider lilies on his desk, being covered in cuts and bruises and burns almost 24/7, tears replacing smiles and laughter. People said it was easier to be a child. That you shouldn't complain because adults have to pay taxes, work 9 hours a day, and pay for everything in between. But Izuku was already struggling to survive. How was he supposed to do the same thing for when he was older, especially if it was supposed to be so much more difficult? He wanted to have a childhood, but instead he lost the feeling of living. Now, it's hard to dwell on it because there's just so much to do before he can be a hero. Sometimes it comes rushing back in a sea of jealousy when he sees his classmates talking about their middle school days and sleepovers and funny family gatherings. Izuku knew he could still make new memories that weren't involved with the need to get better, stronger, smarter, but what was the point? His friends always invited him to outings, but he just couldn't do it. He had expectations to uphold. He didn't need to have fun. Sure, he wanted it, but it wasn't necessary in his life. He can deal with it because it just means he can have more time to train. He's always behind. He needs to catch up. It's never enough. Why is it never enough? Izuku sobs and sobs at night when he realizes how he feels nothing but the ache in his muscles. He's not a child, but he's not an adult. He is expected to be the next #1 hero, to be compliant and hardworking. He shouldn't be so tired of life yet, but he is. He's exhausted. Izuku doesn't know how to keep up with everyone's standards when they're so vast and so hard to reach. Even his own standards for himself are starting to get impossible to grab and hold on to. They keep on getting higher and higher and higher. Izuku knows he's pushing himself, but what else is he supposed to do? He can't relax, no matter how much he wants to. He needs to prepare himself for what's to come, for the future of saving but never being saved. He can't accept his friends' invitations because he's terrified he won't know how to act. What if he messes up or he's too boring and then they all start to hate him? Or what if he wants to start hanging out with his friends more? He can't do that, no matter how much he yearns to. That takes time, and time is used to get better. He can't rest, not even if he tried. Izuku needs to move and move and move until he can't anymore. Sleep is for when you're dead. Was it really that selfish, though, to talk about his struggles without other people casting his feelings away? He knows that other people have it worse, but does that mean that his own inner turmoil means nothing? In the eyes of people, he's a soldier that is designed to learn and give until he drops. Besides that, Izuku is nothing. It's always been like that, one way or another. It's an unspoken algorithm. A child is born and they are expected to grow up. Not too fast, not too slow. They are expected to show feelings. But it can't get too deep or that means someone messed up. And for the love of God, be it somebody else's fault that a child is broken. They have to be acting or over-exaggerating. Maybe they didn't take something into account and are missing the big picture. Children can be sad, but they can't be miserable, because children have it so much easier than adults. So why was Izuku feeling so stuck? Maybe he was acting. That's what everyone from his past had told him, over and over again, until Izuku started to tell himself that, too. The pain never went away, nor did it become easier to handle. The further he pushed it down, the more prominent it became. He never won when it came to his own happiness. His own mother told him that his life isn't that bad. Inko had blamed it on herself, his sadness that is, even when Izuku had told her repeatedly that it wasn't her fault. After a while, Izuku decided that gluing on a fake smile around his mother would be better than telling him how empty, frustrated, suffocated he felt. Izuku lied to himself when he thought it was for the both of them, but that lie could only last so long. He didn't only want to worry his mother, but by talking to her, he was afraid he would only feel worse. Midoryia didn't know how much more he could take when he was already stuck going around in dizzying circles. He hated himself, and that made no sense because Izuku didn't know he was. Maybe that was the whole point. Izuku had learned that all of that misplacement of his feelings had made him unbearably angry. He was angry at everyone who had ever failed him. He was angry at everyone who had expected him to grow up far too fast. He was angry at everyone who had never listened. All he wanted was to be heard. Throughout the years, he kept on pushing, burning out while freezing. By the time he had graduated and become a hero, he was so far down the dark abyss that no one, not that they noticed, would ever be able to find him. He had finally become an adult, but he didn't feel like one. He didn't feel like anything. Izuku was on autopilot most of the time, and he could hardly even remember the days as they passed one by one. When Ajiro, the first of many, died in the line of hero work, Izuku didn't even shed a tear. After all, some of his other classmates were closer to him. He could be consoling them, not the other way around. People have it worse. His friends had it worse. Izuku had no right to seek comfort. After the funeral, when he was alone in his apartment, always alone, the loneliness was a death trap disguised as a hug, locking its hold on him since the age of 4, never to let go. Izuku took out the blade for the first time in years. He didn't stop, his blood being his only consultant. Izuku always smiled. That was the one thing he learned from the people who had failed him. If you smile as though your heart is still working, then things appear okay towards the naked eye. He never cried anymore. People thought that meant he had gotten stronger. Izuku saw that as another part of himself that he had lost. His unshed tears drown him from the inside, only to be released when he's suffocating between his sheets on his cold, lonely bed. Every day, every night, he became less himself. Was there even anything left? And more like the standards people had set him up to be ever since he could remember. He couldn't keep on doing this. He had to keep on going. People, more than ever, depended on him. They needed him. It wasn't him. It was a trick. Why couldn't they see that he was fake? Izuku's death was heroic for the people who didn't know him. Didn't know him like his remaining classmates and teachers did. Izuku died from holding up an entire collapsing building by himself. Izuku had sacrificed himself for the safety of others, just like he always did. But there were many, many different ways Izuku could have saved them while making it out alive. His family knew this, and they knew he knew it as well. No one ever understood why he chose that plan. No one knew the Izuku behind closed doors. How could you know someone who doesn't even know who they are, anyway? The expectations the people and Izuku had on himself reached so high that once he had finally let go, he couldn't get back up again. He was a child who didn't feel like a child. Then he was an adult that didn't feel like one. And then he was nothing. Izuku dreaded breaks away from school. It only meant that he would have to face his mother's wrath. A wrath that he wouldn't dare fight against. She wanted him to be perfect at everything, to make up for his quirklessness, now past quirklessness. But he couldn't do that. Izuku wasn't perfect. No one was. And he was pretty sure he didn't have a quirk that could read her mind, so he knew exactly what she wanted. He hated it. He hated the house he was supposed to call home, but he didn't hate his mother. How could he? and Ko was the only one who stayed in his life after everybody else left him. All Izuku had to do was pay the price and receive pain. At least he wasn't alone. Midoryia would take any forms of torture so long as he wasn't alone in the chambers of his thoughts. For so long, he endured in Ko's punishment's abuse. But then he moved into the dorms and it was so nice and lovely. No one yelled at him when he wasn't perfect or when he slouched or accidentally coughed too loud. It was a change that Izuku welcomed wholeheartedly. It spoiled him. He was stupid, so stupid, to think that his mother would treat him the same as his friends did, as his teachers did. She didn't, of course, but it was okay since he would only be at the house for a few weeks. Plus being here gave him something he didn't get to do as often as he used to. So here he was, running across the rooftops wearing an all-black outfit with a red mask, a hoodie over his head to conceal his bouncy, green curls. It was a rush he often forgot, being so caught up in hero works. He has been doing this fighting many crimes illegally since 6th grade. It was the only thing that helped him escape from his life. The only time where he wasn't a useless Deku, but a savior. His name was Kika during the night, never worked on any major crimes. Mostly just saved people from rapists or muggers and maybe the occasional abuser. He hacked a lot of crime organizers' systems and gave it to the police and found leads to missing people cases. Kika wasn't very well known even though he had saved more people than he could count over the years. Most people were quite keen on keeping his existence as small as possible. For that, he was grateful. Being known would only add to the danger, but he still has his own personal hero who constantly chased after him. It was always Eraserhead. 2 years of chasing him and the hero hadn't once caught him. Izuku was beginning to think it was on purpose, a secret game between the both of them. Tonight, however, had been tough. The beating his mother gave him left him sore and achy all over the place, but he still forced himself to go out. Then, nearing the end of his time, Kika had encountered a small group of thugs trying to rob a man and his younger brother. The green had stopped them, but got stabbed in the shoulder. He was still running with the knife still intact in fear that he would bleed out if he removed it. Eraserhead had just thought that this would be the best time to chase after him. Izuku was just about to leap off of a roof, but had clumsily tripped. If it wasn't for his sensei's capture weapon yanking Izuku towards himself, the kid would have been splattered across the concrete. "Kid," Aizawa tiredly scoffed. "You have a knife in your shoulder." Izuku didn't have time to answer because he was going to be late and he needed to get back to the house before his mom found out he had snucken out. The last time she found out he went out without her permission wasn't something he wanted to repeat, ever. He tried to run because he needed to get back, but his legs collapsed from underneath him, the adrenaline leaving his body in place of exhaustion. "How about this? I'll carry back to my place and get you patched up." Izuku can't allow that to happen because what if his teacher saw his hair or removed his mask or saw the bruises that littered his body like stars? Shouta couldn't know about any of it, but his legs couldn't move and so the hero had no struggle with picking up the teen. "Please, don't. I need to go back." Eraserhead didn't let him go, and Izuku was almost glad. He didn't want to go back, but he had to. "Sorry, kid, but you're coming with me. I don't trust you enough to know how to fix that shoulder all by yourself. I've had worse." Izuku manages to mumble out. It's true. Kika has been shot, stabbed, and electrocuted. Izuku has been stabbed, bruised, burned. Both had broken bones. That isn't something to gloat about. He thinks it is. All those injuries and scars have just been a sign of how much he survived. Besides, you get used to the pain after a while. Izuku woke up hugging something warm and fluffy. He begrudgingly opened his eyes to find himself on the couch in an unfamiliar room. The thing that was snuggled against him was a gray Persian. Midoryia lousily threaded his fingers into the soft fur before comically jumping out of the couch in panic. He ignored the stretch in his shoulder as he quickly gathered his stuff and opened the window, prepared to jump out. Izuku needed to get to the house right now, or he'll be as good as dead meat. He didn't even know whose house this was. "Hold it right there, problem child." Izuku froze and turned around to face the voice. His hand went up to his face only to realize his mask wasn't there. To make matters worse, it was Eraserhead that was standing in front of him. His teacher knew that it was him, the vigilante he's been chasing for just about 3 years. "Ah, Aizawa-sensei. So nice to see you on this fine evening." His teacher doesn't look amused. "You shouldn't be moving that shoulder too much. It'll open up the stitches." The teen narrows his eyes at the adult. Midoryia has his shoulders up so high and he prepares himself for the outburst that is sure to come from his teacher. When adults get disappointed, they yell and hurt. Most of all, they throw away the thing that gave them such disappointment in the first place. "I bandaged your other injuries as well. Some of them looked a few days old. Are all of them from your hobby?" Izuku sits on the couch with Aizawa joining him. The green rubs his temples in attempt to reduce his rising panic. He chooses to ignore that question. It doesn't matter anyway. It's not like the hero will do anything about his home life. No one does. "Are you going to expel me?" He knows that his teacher caught on to the distraction from the question. But either way, it seemed to have worked. Should he? Probably. "You're such a failure." It's a surprise he hasn't already. I don't know. Shouldn't you? You must be so angry with me. Not only have I been causing you trouble for years, but I'm so weak and I honestly don't know why you didn't expel me during the first day. It was a question he asked himself every night when his eyes were burning with exhaustion, but his mind was going 100 miles per minute without stopping. Midoryia, I'm not mad at you. Truth be told, you and your little hobby has helped not only me, but the police as well. I'm not going to expel you because you are already a hero, and it'll be a waste to throw all of your progress away. Don't you agree? Shouda's eyes are soft and truthful, something he has never seen in an adult before. It was foreign, but something Izuku would gladly get used to. The teen took a glance at the clock and immediately froze up. Whatever luck he had that his mother wouldn't have noticed he was gone was long out the window by now. Thank you, sensei. His voice sounded slightly panicked, but he was in too much of a rush to hide it. But can we talk later? I need to get home. Now, he swiftly stood up and went towards the window for the second time, but just like the last, he was stopped by a voice. Kid, are you safe at home? If you aren't, I'll help you. You don't deserve help. But I want it. No one had ever offered help to him before, especially when it involved his mother. Even when the signs were as clear as day, most preferred to turn a blind eye to it. No one has ever cared about him. And for a while, Izuku thought that no one ever will. Midoryia gently shut the window and wiped his watery eyes. He looked back to his teacher, trying his hardest not to tackle the other man in a hug. Izuku's mouth kept on opening and closing, but no words ever came out. What should he say? Nothing he's ever said has ever worked. All he wants is attention. You're lying. Inko would never do that. You're over-exaggerating. You probably deserved it. You won't believe me. Anger took over his voice. People had offered help before, but it was only for images. It's not like they would actually do anything. He's never trusted an adult before, so why should he start now? Why doesn't he want to? I'll believe you. If you're in danger, I'll protect you. It's my job. His voice was calm and neutral. For some reason, everything he just said only invited a new rush of anger and hurt through Izuku. Exactly. It's your job. That's what everyone says. No one ever cares about me, but what they have to do. You'll pretend to listen and help, but then you'll throw me away like everyone else. That's how it's worked before, and it'll always be like that. He could sense the strain of the stitches, but didn't care. In a way, he kind of liked the sensation. It helped ground him. Pain always did that. Aizawa continued to stay calm, and that only put Izuku on edge. He just yelled at an adult. His teacher should be lashing out by now, but he isn't. You're right. The confirmation made Izuku flinch. Everyone does say that. But there's one thing that sets me apart from all the other people you mention. I care about you. Sure, it's my job to teach you and protect you, but it isn't my job to care about you. Yet I do. It's impossible not to, problem child. Something inside Izuku shattered at those words. Please. A sob escaped him as he covered his eyes, his body aching from the scars and bruises that never seem to leave no matter how faded they are. Don't make me go back. Please don't make me go back. Arms wrapped around him as he was engulfed in perhaps the softest hug he has ever had. He clung to the other man as years' worth of pain and secrets escaped him. Not once does Shouda berate him or not believe him. Instead, the hero listens. I got you, kid. You're safe. Izuku believes him. Izuku is her sunshine, the invincible light that could always turn her day into something a bit lighter. She knew he would be destined for great things the moment he was born, no matter how small they were. People would think that that's what any parent would say, but for Inko, it wasn't just because he was her son. His eyes shone with a sparkle that no one else had, a kindness that was ever so delicate yet unbreakable. Her son was special, in ways she couldn't quite fathom. Inko wanted her son to stay this way, and never fade away. She took careful time to nurture him and show him all the love that the world could offer. She didn't forget about the hate, either. Inko taught her kid that while there was much love, there was also hate and darkness, and it was important to know both sides. She told her son this with gentleness and patience, but Izuku was smart and listened to her words with ease. Inko's lessons about the world only seemed to make him into a better person, if that was even possible. He was kind to the misunderstood, to the stubborn, to the people who knew nothing but hate. He showed them the lightness that they had never seen. Some basked in it, while others ran from it. And while Izuku sometimes didn't understand why people were scared of his brightness, he tried his best to accept it. When he first brought up the idea of being a hero, Inko was terrified. He was only 3, but Inko knew that this had already turned into a lifelong goal of his. Her son was stubborn, so all she could do was hide her fear through a smile and support him. At this moment, she knew that her son would become the greatest hero there would ever be. She promised herself that she would continue to teach him the balances of the world and the unfairness of it, the cycles of life and how important it was to take it with acceptance. Inko wanted to teach her son that no matter how small of a deed he does, it could save someone in more ways than one. However, Inko was worried. Her son always gave, but never asked for something back. That was the hardest lesson for her and Izuku. Over and over again, Inko told her son that he couldn't give until he had nothing left because then he won't be able to help in the ways he wants to. She wanted him to know that in order to take care of others, he would have to take care of himself as well. That it was okay to put himself first, essential, even. Her worry grew once Izuku was diagnosed as quirkless, diagnosed, as if it was a disease. She watched for the first time. The light from her son's brilliant eyes fade into darkness. Her hands shook with fear. This was a lesson she had never thought of, an obstacle that never came to mind. Inko was not educated on discrimination and had planned to help her son understand it later on. She never thought that he might be shackled by it. "I'm so sorry, Izuku." They were words neither of them wanted to hear, yet she said them anyways. Those words haunted her in the depths of her dreams, and rightfully so. Inko let them claw at her consciousness, because it reminded her of her failure, a mistake to never be repeated, no matter what. That night, Inko spent all night with her son, hugging him not only for his comfort, but for hers as well. It was selfish, but Inko wished he could have stayed wrapped up in her arms like that forever. With each minute that passed that night, her fear grew into a monster, a fear that enveloped so many things that it was impossible to sort them all out. The next day, when her son was still sound asleep with stained cheeks and puffy eyes, Inko researched. She wanted to be prepared for the discrimination that her son would face, hoping that she could somehow prepare him. The mother cried again that day when her eyes devoured the statistics. She cried harder when the reality came crashing down on her. Inko wouldn't be able to prepare her son for this, but she could be there for him, hold him and support him and encourage him. She knew that she wouldn't be enough, but she could be something. She had to be. Inko watched as her son grew. The older he got, the smaller he seemed to be. The smarter he was, the more guarded he became. She watched how her sunshine, her only sunshine, became nothing but a few specks of light. The kindness never left, and for that she would forever be grateful for. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." The mother made sure to remind her son how much she loved for him. She was desperate for him to know that she cares about him so much, but sometimes it seemed like Izuku was blind to the fact, his eyes casting a shadow with thoughts so loud yet so quiet. Inko used to know every single aspect of her kid, but now she hardly knew anything. And it killed her. "You make me happy when skies are gray." When she saw Izuku's arms for the first time in what seemed to be years, the first thought that passed through her head was how much a failure she was. The thought went away with the wind as she reminded herself that Inko could help him now. Inko would listen now to make amends for all the times she didn't. The red criss-crossed lines that had covered Izuku's arms faded with time, and in place came the hope that he had started to lose. It was slow and gradual, but Inko could see a difference. It meant the world to her once the teen started to become happier and more full of life. She would never be able to put how proud she was into words, because watching someone you love grow and smile after so long of only dreaming about it was one of the most wonderful experiences that Inko ever had. "I'll always love you and make you happy." The light only seemed to grow once Izuku got into his dream school. The mother's worry was always constant, but every time her son came home with a smile, something he had never done before, and told her about his amazing classmates, she would smile until her cheeks hurt. But once the scars started to grow again from his newly developed power, a power that scared Inko because it was the unknown, the unpredictable, a power that she sometimes despised because it only seemed to hurt her child, Inko grew wary. She supported her son in his dream, but he was still so young, and yet he was risking his life like a full-fledged hero would. She experienced anger that she had never felt before, an anger that had been developed unknowingly since the world turned their back on her child. Why was her son always getting hurt? Why was he always so okay with it? It was something she didn't think she would ever understand. Dreams, talents, ambitions are something she believed in. But that didn't mean Inko wanted the only person who made her life worthwhile to risk theirs. The kind man, the one her son looked up to in more ways than one, promised that he would protect him. It was something that she could never succeed at, and Izuku's eyes were so full of flaming determination and hope that the anger simmered down. Even when she wanted to yell, "No, I can't risk it. I can't lose him." Inko questioned herself every day whether or not she was a good parent. She never knew the answer and never will. Despite trying her best every single day, she still found it hard to believe whether or not it was enough. "You told me once, dear, that you really loved me." She witnessed her son go through deadly encounter after deadly encounter, watched how her son started looking so old and wise while he was still so young, analyzed how Izuku became painted with scars by the time he graduated. He always visited, even after high school. Even when he was the #1 hero, he always made time for her. She basked in every visit, fearful that it might be the last. She wished, prayed, hoped every night that her son would be able to live longer than her, maybe even get to settle down and relax with his other friends once they grow too tired to fight. But life wasn't like that. Her eyes were glued onto the TV. Many years after he became a hero, his fist was raised to the sky and his smile was one of life and hope. The tears on her face never stopped once his eyes closed for the last time. his grin never falling from his face. She cried and relived memory after memory with her son, her heart shattering into tiny shards that cut deep. The loneliness blanketed around her. It was a scenario that never left her mind, a fate that she knew would be possible but never acknowledged. Please don't take my sunshine away. The city during the night was so beautiful, all the lights emitting from buildings twinkling like the invisible stars. The rundown building he was on the perfect view. He was in one of the more dangerous parts of the city, but Izuku didn't care. It was sad, to be honest, that this was the only place he didn't have to be anybody, didn't have to feel anything. He could just gaze through his exhausted, burning eyes. He hated that he had to sneak out of the dorms to do this, but he was desperate for the freedom he rarely has. Izuku picks up the soft landing behind him, but doesn't do anything to acknowledge it. All he wants is a few more moments of not living, not surviving, but just existing. A few more minutes, and then he'll go back to living up to the expectations of himself and everybody else. He'll go back to the person he's beginning to be, someone that he could finally be proud of. Hey, aren't you that finger-breaking kid? The voice walks closer and rests his arms on the safety platform, the one Izuku happens to be on. And you must be Hawks. Midoryia had always found the number 2 hero interesting. Something about him was different and akin to plastic. Ah, so you think I'm fake, huh? He didn't mean to say that out loud, but he did. He can't bring himself to care, either. Looking at Hawks for the first time in real life, something seems so similar about him. So sad and broken. No, the depressing thing is that the world is magnificent and elegant, but it's also the exact opposite. It's one of the many rules that they have to live by. Balance. Oh, then what do you think about me? And it clicks. Izuku knows exactly why this hero seems so similar. You're like me. The hero in training knows about the hero commission, how chaotic it is. He also knows that Hawks was trained by them. His feathers seem to sharpen at that, the hero's eyes narrowing. He doesn't get it, and Izuku doesn't truly understand it as well. All he knows is that they are like each other in more ways than one. Izuku can't help but respect him more. What do you mean by that? Guilt slowly seeps through Izuku. Maybe he shouldn't have said that, but he has to keep talking. Hawk's voice seems level-headed, but he's had years of experience distinguishing the slightest change of tone or movement in somebody. He knows that Hawks is scared, skeptical. The teen doesn't make eye contact, instead opting to look at the city. We're both broken, I think. You look like me. I look like you. People have failed us, beyond repair. This is when Izuku decides to make eye contact, his green eyes seemingly glowing in the dark sky. You're a good hero. Hawk smirks, and Izuku likes his smile. It's warm and welcoming with a bit of childishness in it, not like the smiles he's seen him present on TV. This one is real. Thanks, kid. You're going to be a good hero, too. He doesn't know why his eyes water. Maybe it's because Izuku knows he's being truthful. Or maybe it's because he's still not used to being complimented. Thank you. Aren't you supposed to be in the dorms? At this, he cringes. It's getting late, and he's going to be caught if he stays any later. Hawk sparks a laugh, one that makes Izuku chuckle as well. How about I help you get there? It'll take 5 minutes, tops. Flying is surreal. The wind is brushing past his cheeks, biting them with chill. The entire time Izuku smiles and laughs along with Hawks. He hopes that they will be able to do this again. Something tells him that it will, and Izuku can't wait. He hasn't felt this free in an eternity, nor has he ever met a person that he sees himself in. For once, Izuku doesn't think his jaded shards that have been cracked over time are ugly, but beautiful. Maybe that's because he doesn't think Hawks' broken parts are ugly, but something that makes him stronger. They are so beautifully broken. They land on his dorm roof smiling like idiots, Izuku's face stinging from the cold, but he couldn't bring himself to care. Thank you, Hawks. Before Hawks left, he turned back to Izuku. The teen didn't know it, but proudness was shining through his yellow eyes. Keep on fighting. You're doing great. When Izuku went downstairs, tears were streaming down his face quietly. He felt so light, like he was still flying through the air weightless. He didn't even care when he woke up in the morning feeling exhausted. It was worth it, so worth it, because as sad as it was that there was someone broken in the same ways as him, it was also so fulfilling. They both now have someone that understood. They weren't alone anymore. It was funny, in a way. They hardly knew each other, but that didn't matter because they understood one another. The light and comfort in his chest stayed there, and Izuku welcomed it with all his heart. Izuku is staring at himself. Only it's not him. It can't be because Izuku is in his seat while the other him is standing in the middle of the class with eyes dulled and face blank without a single twitch of surprise. Something inside Izuku stirs at the sight of the other him, and it hurts. The other him is wearing a black and white suit and has a scar right across the bridge of his nose. His forearms are proudly exposed and covered in crisscross scars that look like the ones that Izuku has on his hips. Who are you and why do you look like my student? Aizawa's voice breaks through everybody's shocked state, but the person that looks like Izuku but isn't Izuku doesn't answer. All he does is look at him, and Izuku feels nauseated by it. The gaze is like broken glass, and he finds himself relating to it without knowing why. You made it. His voice is different from his own, but there's similarities in it as well. It reminded him of his middle school self and how he wouldn't let an ounce of emotion slip through his voice no matter the costs. It's more practiced, Izuku realizes, less forced and more believable than his ever was. The boy who is him, but it isn't. This is someone he could never be. This is someone who only recited in his nightmares that he didn't even remember starts walking towards Izuku. It's as if he's floating footsteps so quiet that Gyro couldn't even hear them. Aizawa and the rest of the class tense. But for some reason, Izuku doesn't feel threatened. Perhaps it's because this is him. And even though they are strangers to each other, Izuku doesn't think the other him has any reason to hurt. Izuku doesn't know what his alter means by he made it, but it sounds relieved. The other him smiles down at Izuku. The smile brings tears to his eyes at how resigned and agonizing it looks. The hollowness of the other's eyes seeps into Izuku's stomach, a sensation he hasn't felt since middle school. You're going to be a hero. It's true. He is going to be a hero. The truth of it still feels foreign and dreamlike. What about you? Aren't you going to be a hero? The alter's face darkens at that. And Izuku wants to throw up because that look is that of someone who has given up. It didn't work out for me. I gave up. Tried to take someone's advice. The other him looks at Kaken when he says that, and they both pale. They know what he tried to do. And Izuku finds that hard to digest. Finds it hard to even breathe. Izuku had lost count of how many times he thought about ending it. But actually going through with it, never. There was something soul-crushing at the fact that in another universe, he did. The alter continues, I failed and only fell down a darker path. Don't think I'm you, because I'm not. You're a hero, and I'm a villain. At this revelation, Aizawa wraps his student that's not his student in his capture weapon. It doesn't matter if this person he's still a kid, Shouter realizes. Why didn't anyone save him? Has the face of his problem child. He's a villain. Izuku, however, thinks he's lying. No, you're not. I work with villains. He then makes eye contact with Aizawa. You asked who I was. My name is Atlas, and I've hurt people. So many people. Tell me why we're different. It's the first time that Atlas looks surprised, but it's quickly washed away. I help villains. How? What are you trying to accomplish? At this, his alter looks defeated, his mouth opening and closing with words that are begging to escape. I want to save them. No one saves the villains. If you truly think about it, no one saves the broken. It's a fact that they both know all too well, an unwritten code that Izuku still follows to this day. They know it's true because they are both broken. Aizawa releases Atlas, but stays on guard. For once, the whole class is stunned into silence at how heartbroken the supposed villain is. You're not a villain. We're the same. Even though it hurts, you're still trying to save the forgotten. You're a hero. No one understands them but each other. They are the outcasts, the ones that nobody had offered a hand to. So they had to get up by themselves, bloody knees and all. Not allowed to cry or complain but just be. In some cases, they had to be invisible, existing within the torn pages of society. It wasn't fair, life never was, but they learned to adapt, gathering scars and losing tears along the way. Warm silence takes over the two. To them it's peaceful, a quietness they have learned to savor and cherish. Silence that's calm and not a raging hurricane that only stirs up their too dangerous thoughts. To the rest of the class, however, it's awkward and tense. They don't understand, and maybe that's a good thing. Because to understand you would have to experience, and to experience is hell. How did you get here? Aizawa has never seen his student look so at peace before. It's pleasant to see but worrisome that this is what brought forth the calm. The shimmer in his problem child's eyes illustrates cognizance at an alarming degree. And the fact that Izuku is kid, connects and seems to know what Atlas is feeling looms over Shouto like a dark cloud. For the first time, why was it the first time? He should have noticed something. Anything. He notices how Midoryia is unlike no other. His eyes sparkled with determination, but once he looked further, Shouto noticed something broken and devastating. I got hit with a quirk. Atlas then holds up his hand, which is becoming translucent and spreading across his body. And by the looks of it, I'll be going back soon. The young teen turns back to Izuku and smiles. But it's different from the one before. This one radiates honeydew and sunlight. It's a smile that Izuku gladly returns. Make sure you take care of yourself. Only if you do the same. For reasons no one else understands, they start laughing, making light of the situation that they're probably never going to take care of themselves properly. It was dark, but their laughter made them feel weightless. After all, one knows themselves the best. Soon enough, Atlas was gone. Back to his own world with his own struggles and challenges. The encounter made Izuku feel content but also heavy. He wondered if there was a universe where he succeeded in killing himself. He hated to think about it, but the endless stream of what-ifs bouncing around his head wouldn't give him a break. He hated not being in control of his thoughts. Izuku needed to be in control or bad things tended to happen. Not too long after, the bell signifying lunch rings and everyone is scrambling out of the door. Izuku's stomach is still churning, making him nauseous. He doesn't think he would be able to keep any food down even if he tried. Problem child, stay with me for a minute. Maybe because he's already anxious, or having a teacher say that to him has never been a good thing. But his hands begin to shake with no signs of stopping. He dutifully hides them behind his back because he knows his teacher will notice, and he can't handle too many questions. Not when his mind is a swirling whirlpool that's threatening to drag him down through memories he would rather not see. Yes, sensei. Aizawa calmly walks over to Bakugo's desk and sits in his chair, turning it to face Izuku. You shared a lot in common with Atlas, didn't you? He doesn't even realize he's doing it. But Izuku's shoulders hunch up and he sinks further down his sink. No one ever liked it when he was noticeable, so he had to stay small. Stay hidden. I mean, we are the same person. It's only logical we would relate to each other. Relate? How so? And damn it, Izuku should really watch his word choice. They shouldn't be talking about this, anyway. It's not important. It's only Izuku's to think and worry about. We share similar viewpoints, I guess. Had the same thoughts and experiences, at least some of them. He hopes that's enough. This is his own, private life. He wants to hold it close to his chest and cherish it while watching it burn up. And what are those? Aizawa knows he's digging into uncharted clarity, but he needed to know his student to help him. That is, if he wanted it. Does it matter? This is something that only Atlas and I would be able to understand. You won't, and that's okay. I'm glad you won't. Besides, it's not important. It is, and they both know it. If it doesn't matter, then why are you having such a hard time telling me? Please, Shouta begs. He wants to help this kid. He doesn't want Izuku to find home in loneliness. Aizawa has to drag him out and show him that he deserves to heal, from whatever that may be. Izuku seems so hurtfully confused as he shakes his head, denying something that can't be heard. I don't understand. Why are you asking? No one has ever asked before. That statement claws at Shouta's heart. His kid had never had someone to rely on, hadn't he? Someone should have. I should have asked sooner, and I'm sorry for that. Izuku agrees. Someone should have asked, but they never did. No one had ever cared enough, but now someone did. And Izuku was tempted to give in and finally talk. Aizawa was a teacher, though. Besides, Izuku didn't even know where to start with how much of a messed up sheet he had to go through. Yet, a part of him wanted to know. To know what it felt like to have a light chest and having the ability to breathe without thinking about what would happen if it just stopped. Make sure you take care of yourself. It was a joke, but Izuku still wanted to take it seriously. He wanted to start loving himself and finally start living. He didn't want to be a danger to himself anymore. He didn't want to be tired anymore. Izuku gave in, starting from the beginning that no one else knew about but him, and now his teacher. He finally told someone how much he hated himself and how it was eating him alive and how close he was to becoming someone like Atlas. How close he was to taking someone's advice. He was exhausted, but he was finally beginning to heal in ways he thought he never could. Izuku was falling, and it was beautiful, only until he wasn't, and it was such a shame because he thought that would be beautiful, too. He thought that not falling anymore would mean internal darkness and a broken neck, maybe even splattered brains across the cement with a growing puddle of blood surrounding his mangled body. Not a bar. At first Izuku thought that it was some sort of purgatory. It would make sense, especially since killing yourself is considered a sin, but Izuku didn't believe in that. There were people staring at him, and Izuku couldn't help but observe and analyze them. The one thing that stood out to him most was that they all looked like they needed saving. And, well, Izuku had always wanted to be a hero. Kurogiri, why did you save this brat? The gray-haired man spoke as he scratched at his skin. Izuku so desperately wanted to tell him to stop and say that it isn't good to hurt yourself, but he didn't know this man and this man didn't know him. He didn't think his words would make much of an impact. Yet, as always, his mouth moved before his brain could catch up. You shouldn't scratch yourself. It's not healthy. The man that he realizes is probably only a few years older than him snares at him, says the boy who just tried to kill himself. Izuku doesn't bother to even bat an eyelash. It's not like the man was wrong. I don't count. The young adult's sneer only solidifies as Izuku realizes this man is quick to anger. And why is that? Because I was born to die. It was the truth, and everybody who knew him knew what he was, thought so too. Being quirkless is a sentence in itself. It meant a horrible life filled with stabbing words and bruises, scars that itch, and monsters as thoughts. That was the life of a quirkless person until it was taken away from them. An endless cycle that needed to be fixed but never was. The man smirks and there's a twinkle in his eye that brings Izuku on edge. I'm Shigaraki Tamura. And you. He didn't want to share his name. It didn't feel like it belonged to him anymore. Not after what he just tried to pull. Not when this is something Midoryia Izuku would ever do. Atlas, it meant to carry. It was suitable especially since Izuku wanted to help carry the weights of others. That was the day he became a villain. Others joined and he made more connections. He learned and observed, finding what made everyone tick in their own special, unique way. He only fought when it was someone bad, and he never took from the people who didn't deserve it. Atlas tried to get the now-named League of Villains to a different side. A different life that didn't involve killing. But his efforts were never good enough. He even gained allies on different sides as well in secret. The League didn't need to know about his other acquaintances. Some were heroes, while the others were the ones that balanced on the gray line. Atlas couldn't place himself in a certain group of society anymore. He was always floating between the multiple different sides to the point where he was beginning to lose himself. He's made his accomplishments, however. Atlas rescued a young girl with too many scars from a horrible man. It was major luck that he even met her, let alone saved her. He took her to the only hero that he could trust with Eri's protection, Eraserhead. Atlas would be killed if he ever admitted it, but he had been giving subtle hints to the hero about the League's whereabouts and how their pasts had come to shape them. He needed Eraserhead to know that these people needed saving. He so desperately wanted someone else to understand and know that there are people who are ignored and degraded so obviously that it hurts. Atlas, he wasn't Izuku anymore. He needed to understand that saved a few others as well. A young little boy who had lost his parents, another kid he had entrusted to Eraserhead, gave hope to a boy who refused a part of himself, and even helped his childhood friend help escape the boss. All for one was the big picture. The only way Atlas could save the League, his family, was to kill him. That was the only way. But then All Might defeated him. No, he didn't. You can't simply defeat AFO. Don't be stupid, and Atlas was given hope that he could run away with the League and not hurt anyone anymore ever again. God, he hated hurting people, even if they were bad. It tore at him until they became visible scars. He hated the person he had become and found himself fantasizing about what would have happened if his attempt had worked. He knew it was bad to think that, but it was the only way he could go to sleep peacefully these days. The hope that things might be turning towards the bright side grew when he saw Tamura smile more often, and Toga talking less about gore, and Twice becoming more at peace with himself. Atlas had seen them become happier, and it made his chest feel lighter and mind less foggy. He noticed that the less they killed and infiltrated and fought, the less caged they became. It was nice to see the only people who accepted him getting better and becoming more fulfilling. He let himself bask in the warmth, but that was his weakness. Something changed within the League, and it was heartbreaking. Fear began to set in once they realized that with the less they fought, the more likely they were to fail AFO. The bar that was becoming Atlas's happiness faded away into a stressed, dark storm that brought him to square one in every possible way. Atlas, who was he? Izuku, Atlas, Deku, he didn't know, and it only broke him further than he already was. Eventually grew exhausted. The ropes that kept his hope of saving his family were slipping in his grip and tearing his hand raw. The more he lost to himself, the more his grip slipped. He was tired and he wished for everything to just stop, but it didn't. And things just kept on getting worse. The more work they had to do, the more angry they became. The angrier they got, the more they hurt. It was one of the most awful scenes that he has ever seen. Watching the people he loves and care about regressing back to when the only thing they knew was darkness. One day, Izuku snapped. He needed to know why they were doing this. Why they were destroying themselves when they could be so much happier. Why are you guys doing this? It was the first time he had ever yelled, slamming his hand against the bar table so hard that his hand stung. The room was silent. People watching, analyzing, calculating their next move. Toga put a finger to her chin. She was trying to act clueless, but Izuku saw her shaking as clear as a summer day. What do you mean, Atlas-kun? It only made Izuku angrier. He loathed how they acted, oblivious to how broken they were when it was there, in plain sight. It only burned at his eyes and made his limbs shake. It made the fog in his mind come creeping back and water fill his lungs. He hated it, hated himself. Maybe he took on more than he could chew. Still, Izuku, Deku, Atlas continued to fight. Why are you destroying yourselves? Can't get it. Things were getting better, weren't they? I saw how Tamura was scratching less, how Twice fought with himself less and less. How you, Toga, looked the most serene I have ever seen you. You all hate what we're doing. So why? Tamura was the one to speak up. It's not that simple, Atlas. You know this. We can't be saved. Anybody can be saved. Why can't you see that? Everyone in here deserves to be saved, and all I want to do is help. All I ever wanted to do was help. Tamura began to scratch at his neck, ignoring the way Atlas glared at his hand. Atlas, my name is Izuku Midoryia, and I am so tired of everything. We're all so young. Why are we throwing it away? Why can't you understand that you deserve to be saved? It was the first time he had cried in front of the League, but he didn't care. All he cared about now was helping the people who saved him. He ignored the whisper in the back of his mind that reminded him of all the times he wished they didn't. This wasn't about him. This was about them. He sobbed and ran a shaky hand through his hair. It's not fair. Why can't you be happy too? You don't deserve this. We don't deserve this. They stared at him, and he stared back. No one knew what to say, because they knew it was true. But that didn't make it any easier to think about. It pulled at their chests and made them ache all over. A survival skill they needed but didn't have. None of them knew what it was like to breathe without worry, to have a peaceful mind and not an eternal war with your mind that was slowly tearing you apart every single day. Izuku calmed his breathing and looked at the group, tears still streaming endlessly down his face. We need to save us. Izuku was like Eri as much as Eri was like Izuku. They both knew it, never having reason to address it out loud. It was a fact, something Izuku hated. He hated that someone sought comfort from him because he was the only one who could understand. Hated that the person who related to him was Eri. Sweet, kind, Eri who should have had a loving beginning to a childhood. She shouldn't have started her life out with the pain of being ripped apart only to be brought back together over and over again. She didn't deserve any of it. And if Izuku could make the scars on her body disappear, he would. Izuku couldn't do that, however, and instead gave her hope and all the other things she deserved. Eri deserved the world. But Izuku couldn't give her that. He taught her that she was safe and could be anybody she wanted to be, and he wouldn't ever judge her. He promised her that he would be there for her, and he wasn't planning on breaking that anytime soon. It was late, but Izuku couldn't sleep. Memories of flames and explosions and disappointed looks clouding his mind. He was looking over his essay for the 5th time when his phone buzzed from a text. A spike of anxiety shot through Izuku once he saw it was Aizawa. He never contacted him, so it had to be an emergency. Or maybe he's in trouble, but that wouldn't make sense because it was so late, so why would his teacher be texting him now if he was in trouble and Aizawa was mad at him? Before his thoughts could continue to run, Izuku picked up the phone only to see that he was asking if he was awake. Izuku quickly confirmed, thoughts only solidifying that Aizawa was mad at him for a reason he was unaware of. Not even a minute later, he got another text from his teacher saying that Eri had a nightmare and wanted to see him. Izuku didn't even need to think about it to say that he'll be right over. He grabbed his green robe and put on his shoes before making his way to the teacher's dorms. It wasn't his first time being over since he helped look after Eri a lot. He would also cook the teacher's dinner sometimes as well, and he was deemed trustworthy enough to have a key to the dorms. Izuku was slightly out of breath by the time he made it to his teacher's room and lightly knocked. The door opened to reveal a less than happy Shouta and a timid Eri who jumped right into his arms. He picked her up swiftly, wrapping his arms around her securely but not too tightly. The hero stepped aside and let the teen in. Izuku walked in and sat down on the couch as Aizawa poured 2 cups of coffee for the both of them. Do I even want to know why you're up this late? Couldn't sleep, so I decided to study. Izuku's voice was quiet and soft so as to not startle Eri. He began to rub circles on her back as he felt his shirt start to gain a wet spot from her tears. Oh, how he wished he could make her tears disappear. You're safe, Eri-chan. Don't worry, I got you, he whispered soothingly. Aizawa set down the 2 coffee mugs onto the counter and sat next to him on the couch. You weren't there in my dream. Someone took you. You weren't safe. Izuku was glad that Eri could now talk about her nightmares without any coaxing. It was an achievement that he was so very proud of. I'm here now. I'm sorry I wasn't before. It had a double meaning to it, and everybody understood what he had meant. Eri starts to cry even harder and Izuku begins to panic. Shouta furrows his brows in concern as he watches the crying girl. But are you safe? Did the heroes save you too? She's not talking about the dream anymore, and a part of Izuku wishes that they were. Heroes didn't save him from the abuse of school and the yelling of his mother or even from his fiery father. He could always come back, so is he ever safe? No one had saved him from himself. He had to bear through it all by himself with no shoulder to lean on. Izuku didn't want to lie to Eri. He had a feeling she would know if he did. Anyway, so Izuku hugged her tighter and tried to ignore the gaze of his teacher. No, Eri-chan, they didn't, but that's okay. I saved myself. You don't have to do that though. You know why? Eri looks at him, red eyes sparkling from the tears shed moments ago. Because you have me, and Aizawa, and everybody else in UA. We'll help save you and be there for you so you never have to do it alone. Always know that, okay? The girl nods and hugs him again. Thank you, Deku-nai. Always, Eri-chan. Always. It's not long before Eri falls asleep again. Izuku tucking her back into bed. Once he makes his way back to his teacher's living room, he notices a serious expression on his face as he stares at his coffee. He makes his way back to the couch and sits down. Are you all right, sensei? Kid, I should be the one asking you that. What? The confusion is clear in his voice. He doesn't even remember the last time somebody had asked him if he was all right or not. In all honesty, Izuku can't even tell anymore. Aizawa chugged his coffee before giving the teen his full attention. It all makes sense now. Eri, she acts differently around you. You're the only one she's 100% open with, and she always has this look in her eyes when you're with her. It's kind of protective and understanding. Izuku wonders if it pains Shouta on what he's going to say next. His face is lined with worry and his shoulders are sagged down as if he doesn't want to believe what he knows is true. You were abused too, weren't you? Izuku has never had anyone directly ask him that before. Not even at the beginning, when he didn't bother hiding the bruises and burns. When he thought that what he was going through was normal. Another part of life everyone had to go through. He hadn't even known he was being abused until a counselor came into his 5th grade class to talk about the subject. Izuku had always known that his parents were different. Noticed how everyone's parents always seemed so nice and never yelled at each other. How no one ever carried the scars and injuries he had too. Izuku devotes his eyes to his scarred hands, not having the energy nor will to make eye contact. Yeah, I was. A part of himself fears that his teacher, the only adult that he has ever let himself trust in a decade, wouldn't believe him. Once Izuku found out what abuse was, and that he was a victim of it, he had gone to tell his teacher. He had been foolish enough to believe that telling someone would have helped, but they never believed him. He had learned to keep his mouth shut after that. You said you were safe. Was that true? Izuku's head snaps up in surprise that Aizawa believes him. Having someone trust him and ask if he was safe was a new feeling to Izuku. It was odd and new, but something he might just let himself get used to. Yeah, I am. It's not like his mom hit him anymore, and his dad was long gone by now. There was still the fear that he would come back, only to come back to haunt him in his memories turned nightmares. I don't just mean physically, problem child. Another wave of confusion consumes him as he tries to unravel what the hero meant. Sure, his mom would yell at him and set him to impossible standards, but she still fed him and gave him a place to sleep when he had to go visit. I'm safe. It's not like my mom hits me anymore and she gives me food and all the other necessities. He hadn't meant to say that his mother used to hit him, but what did it matter anyway? Yes, his mother and him will always have a strained relationship. He always flinches when she gets too close, shakes when she raises her voice, or anyone does for that matter. Dreads that days he has to go visit her. But at least it wasn't what it used to be like when he was quirkless. Anymore. Even if she doesn't hit you anymore, she can still go to jail. Aizawa looks angry, and Izuku hunches his shoulders to make himself smaller on trained instinct. Shouta notices the slight change and frowns at it. The kid's past reactions making so much more sense now. Kid, you need help. You can't see her anymore, because even if she still doesn't physically abuse you anymore, your mother can still do a lot of emotional damage. For the first time that night, tears escaped his green eyes, dancing down his cheeks quietly as soft whimpers escape his mouth. No one has helped me before. No one had ever believed me before. He curls further into himself and doesn't move as he feels arms wrap around him in a hug that reminds him of the ones he gives her. Izuku clings onto the scarf to remind himself that he wasn't dreaming, that this was real, and someday had finally taken their time to listen. It was great to be heard. I'll help you, and you won't have to feel ignored ever again. Izuku doesn't say anything, not being able to find the words to express how wonderfully glad he is. Instead, he just clings tighter and cries harder, letting all those tears that had been too afraid to fall loose. A light blossomed in his chest as his eyes grew heavy and started to close. He fell asleep and didn't have one nightmare. Izuku woke up on an unfamiliar couch with one of the most comfiest blankets Izuku has ever felt on top of him. The scent of eggs and pancakes fills his nose as the memories of last night. His face heats up in embarrassment for having an entire meltdown in front of his teacher, not like it's happened before. Good, you're awake. Could you go and wake up Eri for me? Izuku absently nods and gets up to retrieve Eri from her room. He kindly sits on her bed and nudges her shoulder softly. Eri-chan, it's time to get up. His voice is just above a whisper, soft and patient. He watches as the sleepy girl flutters her eyes open and sits up. Deku Nai, you're still here. Her voice is laced with drowsiness and her hair is defying gravity. It makes Izuku smile at how comfortable she is. Yeah, I stayed the night. Now come on, Aizawa-sensei is making breakfast. They both hop out of her bed and walk towards the kitchen, Eri grabbing his hand and rubbing her eyes with the other. He helps Eri up onto her chain next to the dining table before asking, do you need any help, Aizawa-sensei? The hero shakes his head. No, I'm just about done. He answers as he places the food onto the table and hands Izuku a cup of coffee. And you don't need to call me sensei out of class. Aizawa is fine. Yes, Aizawa-sen. I mean Aizawa. Izuku could have sworn he had seen a small uplift of Shouta's cheeks, but blamed it on him seeing things. The breakfast is quiet but peaceful. It's different from eating with his class, it usually being filled with chatter and small amounts of chaos. I was wondering, once we get the situation with your mother under control, if you wanted to be put under my custody. You don't have to say yes. You can always just be under UAS custody if you want to. And you'll be living in the dorms until you graduate. The question had Izuku's eyes widen in disbelief. In other words, Aizawa wanted to adopt him? You'd really want to do that? I don't want to burden you. Aizawa hit him with a serious stare that ended the non-existent argument. Izuku, you have never been a burden and you never will. I wouldn't have offered if I didn't want to take care of you. Eri and Aizawa looked at him expectantly, but patiently. Izuku thought about what it would be like to be under his care as a guardian, maybe even dad. But that was too soon, and even though he loved the idea, Izuku didn't want to get his hopes up. Izuku would get to see Eri more, and he wouldn't have to dread going to his mother's anymore. Izuku would feel safe, maybe even at peace. And wasn't that a thought? Izuku's mind was always buzzing with anxieties and fears that crawled up his spine and hid themselves in the corners of his mind. Maybe this would help. He wanted to feel loved again. I think that would make me really happy. With that, Izuku grinned as his eyes watered with happiness and love. For the rest of the day, Izuku was covered in a light he had never felt before. It was securing and wonderful, because he would finally get a family that loves him. Izuku had finally gotten what he had wanted for so long. For a while, Izuku was stupid enough to believe that things had gotten better. Friends, real friends, not the ones he fooled himself in having back in middle school, teachers that played fair, and finally beginning to feel alive. All the things he dreamed of became his new reality. He soaked in every second that a smile stretched on his face without it being forced, melted into every comforting touch, selfish enough to crave more because he hadn't felt a non-harmful touch in years. Everything was turning around, and Izuku was so very grateful for it. But good things never last forever. The most frustrating part of it all was that nothing even happened. He should be completely fine, on his way forward to becoming even better than he was the day before. Yet, when Izuku woke up that morning, he drowned. The heaviness overtook him and Izuku couldn't understand for the life of him why. He thought that he was finally getting better, but the soul-deep exhaustion proved him wrong. The thought of all the progress being fake, or a mere illusion, was shattering. He shouldn't feel like this anymore. Not when he didn't have a reason to anymore. It was stupid and selfish to feel this way when Izuku was so lucky. He still hadn't gotten out of bed. Didn't think he could. The single step of getting up seemed like a million small tasks so overwhelming that it seemed impossible to achieve. He couldn't do this. Not again. Had he even been getting better? Or was it just a pause of the dark void that had become his home since the age of 5? Either way, it wasn't fair. He had a quirk and everything else he has ever wanted. He didn't have the right to feel like this anymore. So why? The tears were refusing to come out and he had to remind himself to breathe. But God, when had breathing become such a chore? Yesterday he was on cloud 9. And now he could barely fucking move. It was pathetic and he had no right. Was Izuku always meant to feel like this? In a span of less than 24 hours, he had lost all hope. His grip on the light slipping but still there, giving him blisters and a torn heart. His mind that has been quiet resurfaced with a loud thunderous roar. It made itself comfortable in every other corner of his brain like it had never left in the first place. The first thought that came to his mind was if he could suffocate himself with his pillow. If the ache in his lungs would bring him some peace. But he couldn't do that. This had to be wrong. A nightmare or trick of mind. Sadness doesn't dissolve so easily. Only toddlers have that kind of luxury. He had finally begun to find himself, and he was utterly terrified that he would lose it again. It made him shake and quiver at the knowledge that he wouldn't make it if this continued. He was already so tired and the panic was slowing down, being replaced with numbness. Izuku lied when he told himself he was fine. It was something he did back then to get by. Fool himself into believing that he was faking it, asking for attention when nobody was in the room. It was so stupid to feel and think this way when he could so easily get help, or take a swan dive off of a roof. No, he couldn't do that, especially now when he's actually worth something. When people care about him and treat him like he was human and not some sort of disease. And that's all that had changed, hadn't it? Izuku got a quirk and with it came all the other expected joys in life that other people took for granted. The sad truth was, his quirk made him likable. Not him. Not Izuku. Everyone's entire identity, entire life was built upon their quirk. The knowledge made a new emotion invite itself into his heart. Everything was jumbled and he didn't know where he was. There were too many emotions, but he begged for more. Amidst of feeling too much, he had begun to feel nothing. Anger. He was pissed at everything. The society that he had been raised in and tricked everybody. The people who brought him to hell and forced him to fight all by himself against himself. He hated himself for letting things get so dark and impossible. The anger made him restless, the need to get up stronger than ever. Slowly, he willed himself to sit up and swing his legs over the bed. Half of him wanted to give up right there and try to fall back asleep, but he couldn't, his legs twitching with need to move. Izuku finally rose from his bed and put his robe and shoes on. The small tasks were difficult, but he slowly pushed through. He used to deal with this every day. He could get used to it again if it came to that. It's not like he had much of a choice. He made it outside, the cold night air burning his lungs pleasantly. Izuku takes the trail through the little forest they sometimes train at. The trees make him feel less lonely, but when he looks up, staring at the stars, he feels so small and insignificant. Like nothing he does will ever matter in the grand scheme of things. And maybe that's correct, but isn't it the little things that count? Izuku has done many things and has saved a numerous amount of people, but if he wasn't there, would those people still have gotten saved? Would the scenario turn out better if he wasn't there at all? The thoughts become a jumbled mess as he crouches down to the ground with his hands over his head, clutching his hair tightly enough that his head begins to ache. Everything becomes too much too soon and he doesn't know what to do. He shouldn't be feeling like this anymore. Heroes aren't broken. But he was. So very broken and he couldn't stand it. Izuku barely registers the heartbreaking scream that tears itself from his throat, his hand pulling tighter at his hair, pulling chunks out. The screams turned into a cracked sob and the drowning sensation was back. Or did it ever leave? Had he been drowning this entire time, choking on his own sadness? The thoughts kept spinning, and it wouldn't stop even with his head forcibly squished into the grass trying to turn it off. He just need everything to stop. It didn't, and Izuku was left alone to deal with it, like he always was. He couldn't do anything for a while. His head sandwiched between his hands in the grass that felt so sharp against his skin. He was freezing. The prickles of his skin were the only indication he was still alive and breathing. Izuku wasn't sure if he should be grateful for that or not. Izuku finally got up once the start of the sun's rays peeked out. His knees were aching and numb from being in that position for who knows how long. Slowly and quietly, he made it to the dorms. Right as he reached the building, the entrance door opened and revealed it, no doubt getting ready to start his morning run. Izuku saw how his friend's expression turned into one of a greeting, then quickly shifted to worry. Midoriya-kun, are you okay? He always hated to make his friends worry, and he must look like death itself right now. The thought made Izuku cringe, without even needing to think about and wasn't that dangerous? Being able to lie so easily, Izuku smiled and lied through his teeth. Yeah, I'm good. Have a good run, Ida-kun. He knew his friend wasn't entirely convinced, but Izuku decided to make an escape before Tenya could ask any further questions. Once Izuku was in his room, a new wave of determination settled into his heart, this one being more self-destructive and dangerous than the one he's adorned before. As he was putting his uniform on and hiding all evidence of the prior eyes, Izuku thought that he could do this. After all, he did it before, so why couldn't he just adjust to it again? Izuku would be fine dealing with this. It would be okay. It had to be. He forgot that there were people there for him now. Forgot that he could be saved, too. And how sad was that? Aizawa observes, and he observes closely, taking the small details of his students that might pass easily to an untrained eye. He writes mental notes of how Bakugo looks less angry, the confidence Yaoyorozu has gained this past year, Kota seems to be talking more recently, Todoroki is becoming more comfortable with himself, and how Midoriya is always so independent. It was a trait that Shouto was hoping would change at least a sliver because Midoriya was independent to a fault, and that was a problem in itself. Add in the training to be a hero only made it all the more serious. The problem child had learned and grown a lot this year. Having confidence in himself at the beginning of the year, he couldn't even raise his hand, gaining control of his quirk, and he seemed to be overall a lot more happier than he was at the start. Shouto was proud of his student of all of them, but no matter how many times he told the Greenette that it was okay to ask for help, Izuku would never listen. Aizawa has absolutely no clue where or who he got the idea from that he had to do everything himself. Izuku never complained, not even when he completely shattered both his arms, never brought attention to an injury unless it was absolutely necessary, which it always was. But Izuku thought it only meant if it was drastic or just plain obvious. And Izuku has never sought out help for anything outside his physical health again. Only when it was utterly obligatory, even when there were times when it was as clear as day that his kid was struggling. Shouto had been noticing that Midoriya was slowly starting to wither. He didn't know when it started, but all of a sudden Izuku had deep bruises on his eyes that surpassed his own, and sometimes his hands would shake so bad that his pencil would clatter to the ground. Izuku was still doing fine during heroic practice, but with the way things were going, he doubted that would last much longer. The hero needed to put a stop to this and give his kid the help that he knew he deserved. It was drastic, especially when one slip-up could lead to a major injury, and God knows that the kid has had enough of those. Midoriya, see me after class. He quickly quieted the class when they started teasing Izuku, who was desperately trying to sink into his chair. Everyone, shut up. He's not in trouble. The reassurance didn't seem to calm Midoriya down in the slightest, and that was a worry in itself. Izuku has never been one to rely on adults or anyone, to be frank. But teachers were supposed to be people who you could trust and talk to. The problem child, however, has made it very clear that he has no trust in any teacher, something that he plans on fixing should have fixed a long time ago. By the time class was over, Midoriya's shoulders were hiked up as far as they could. His eyes were darting to the exits, and Aizawa could see the exact moment when the windows became one. Once everybody but them had left the classroom, Shouto walked over to Bakugo's chair and sat on it backwards so he could face Izuku. Like I said before, you're not in trouble. Again, the reassurance didn't seem to soothe him. If I'm not in trouble, then why am I here? The response made him frown slightly. He didn't like that his student thought that the only reason that led to being talked to by his teacher was him being in trouble. I wanted to ask how you were feeling. Aizawa specifically didn't ask if he was okay or alright, because then it might lead to the assumption that that was what he wanted to hear. It would only give a bigger chance of receiving a lie. I'm feeling fine. I'm not sick or injured. Izuku didn't make eye contact with Shouto. Now that he was thinking about it, he never did. Nor did Izuku do it with any of the other teachers. He only interacted with them when he had to, but even then, Midoriya kept that at a minimum. While I'm glad that you're not ill or injured, that's not what I meant. At the curious look he got from the greenette for a split second, Aizawa continued, "What I mean is, how are you mentally and emotionally?" It was a question they both somewhat knew the answer to. There were two outcomes to this. Izuku would try to lie and deny the truth, which would lead Shouta to tell the young teen why he wasn't okay and that was perfectly okay. Or his problem child will finally trust the hero and tell him what's been going on in his mind as of late. Instead, none of those happened. Izuku stood up and threw his backpack on with a bright, painfully forced smile that made his eyes wrinkle. "I'm doing perfectly okay, sensei. I appreciate the concern, though." He took a deep breath that seemed almost painful. "I have to go and help our study group. See you tomorrow." And then Izuku was gone, leaving a frustrated and confused Aizawa behind in an empty classroom. It wasn't until later that night when Aizawa encountered Midoryia again. He had just gotten back from patrol when he noticed a figure on top of the roof. Shouta sighed to himself and began to make his way up to the rooftop, ready to yell at one of his students for being out past midnight when they very much knew that it wasn't allowed. He was expecting it to be Takoyami out stargazing or even Kota conversing with the birds. But instead he was met with a mop of green curly hair. The boy was leaning over the railing almost dangerously, and had a lost look in his eyes. His usual hiked-up shoulders were sloped down as if there was an invisible, impossible weight on them. Shouta walked quietly, but made sure his presence was known to the teen. "Kid, what are you doing up here?" His tone was as soft as it could be, but held an edge of concern. The hero set himself by Midoriya's side where he noticed that he had been holding the railing so tight that his knuckles were white. It was freezing out, and Izuku was wearing nothing but some shorts and pants with his red shoes. "I couldn't sleep. I was going to train more, but I'm too tired." The way Izuku had said that made it seem like he wasn't just physically tired, but as a whole, down to the bone, scratching at the soul. "Have you not been sleeping well lately?" Still, a lack of sleep couldn't be the whole problem. It was a part of it for sure, but there was something that Aizawa was missing. A knowledge he was supposed to have but didn't. "Sensei, I haven't slept well in years." Nothing was coming together like it should be. It just added more questions to the answer. The dead tone Izuku used had chilled Aizawa down to the bone. He never thought that Izuku could ever not be emotive, but right now he was a puppet with his strings cut off. Izuku, the use of his kid's first name was on accident, but it seemed to grab the teen's attention nonetheless. "You know it's okay to ask for help, right? More often than not, it makes you stronger. Plus you're just a kid." Apparently, that wasn't the right thing to say. Midoryia slams his fist onto the safety rail, denting it. His face twists into anger so fast that it's almost like a mask, already imprinted without so much of a twitch. "And I hate it. Everyone says I'm just a kid, but I'm not. I can't be. Not anymore. Not when I have more scars than actual skin. And definitely not when the world is impatiently waiting for me on my shoulders." Izuku's voice is steady and loud, but a sad kind of quietness drifts with it. The words ring in Aizawa's ears, sure to bring nightmares with the nights to come. Shouta keeps his voice soft but strongly reassuring, determined to get his point across. "You shouldn't have to deal with that." He could tell Izuku was about to rebuttal, but the hero continues before he could. "But you do. However, that doesn't mean you have to go through it alone. You have your friends, the entirety of Class 1A. You have me and the other UA staff who absolutely adore you." The comment lifted Izuku's cheeks a little. Shouta didn't even bother to stop his small smile, either. "And I'm pretty sure that Eri would do just about anything for you." The next few moments are quiet. Midoriya taking in every word his teacher said and being reminded of how many people are there for him now. It's worrying, which saddens him more. He wishes that he always had someone to rely on, but that wasn't the case. He does now, and Izuku is so very grateful. Before he could even stop himself, Izuku launched himself into Shouta's chest. He feels the rise of embarrassment from it, but that's washed away the moment he feels hands wrap around him securely. The hug isn't awkward or stiff. Instead, it's grounding because Izuku isn't alone to fight his own mind anymore. For most of his life, Izuku has had to walk down a lonely road of life, having no one to talk to, reassure him, hug him, and it had taken a toll before he had even realized it. And now, Izuku wasn't sure if he ever wanted to let go. Eventually, they do have to let go. Both go down to the common room and Aizawa makes both of them a mug of hot chocolate. It's perhaps the best hot cocoa Izuku has ever had, and he happily relishes in every drop. It's then that Aizawa chooses to speak again. "I know it'll be hard, especially after you've been used to doing everything on your own, but I hope someday you'll fully learn that you deserve to ask for help. Izuku, you're not alone. And while I know there's a lot of aspects I'm missing, I want you to know that I'll always be here for you. I won't force you to tell me everything, but don't think you can't either." A shaky but sunny smile paints across Izuku's face at the words. "Thank you, Aizawa-sensei." Shouta tries his best to smile without looking terrifying. "You don't have to thank me, kiddo." Aizawa was being a decent human being. There was nothing else to it. Yet, the problem child didn't see it like that. Izuku probably thought of it as a diamond in the rough, a rarity for another person other than Izuku himself to be there for him. It was both heartbreaking and concerning, and Shouta will gladly show his kid just how much he deserves to be helped. Still, I'm immensely grateful. Oh, and Aizawa-sensei. The question is somewhat hesitant, something Aizawa hopes to work on with the kid. God knows that Izuku could use a self-esteem boost. Yes, problem child. What's the recipe for the hot chocolate? The greenette's eyes are shining with curiosity. Aizawa can't help but let out a non-judgmental laugh at the unexpected innocent question. Shouta smirks at this being terrifying, but it only makes Izuku giggle. It's a secret. Guess you'll just have to ask me whenever you want some. Midoryia pouts cutely, but doesn't push. Truth is, there's no secret ingredient or recipe. It was just a packet. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.